Hello, guys. Tonight, we unravel the eerie threads of history's 5 strangest plagues, those forgotten whispers where ordinary lives twisted into waves of uncontrollable dance, hysterical laughter, stampeding sheep, phantom gases, and even cloistered bites that echoed through stone walls. Picture yourself in Strasbourg's sweltering streets of 1518, where a single sway blooms into hundreds shuffling endlessly under the summer sun, skirts swirling like fallen leaves in a fevered wind, their steps a silent rebellion against famine's grip. Or lean into the humid shores of Lake Victoria in 1962, giggles bubbling from schoolgirls like rain on still water, spreading through villages until laughter chokes the air, unraveling a newborn nation's quiet dawn. These weren't mere illnesses. They were history's odd heartbeats, pulsing with the unseen fears that bind us all. And here's a cheeky nudge. In the grip of these bizarre outbreaks, you probably won't survive. The sheer weirdness without questioning your own sanity. So before you dive into this story, take a second to hit that like and subscribe button. But only if this really ignites a fire in you for the legendary events I tell. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. Where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself standing on the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg in the early summer of 1518, the air thick with the scent of baking rye bread and the faint, acrid tang of the Rhine River's muddy banks. You are not a king or a scholar, but one of the ordinary souls who make a city hum. Perhaps a weaver in a narrow guild hall off the Grande Rue, or a fishmonger haggling over glistening carp at the weekly market near the cathedral. Strasbourg, perched on the western fringe of the Holy Roman Empire, is no glittering capital like Vienna or Prague. It is a sturdy trading hub, its half-timbered houses leaning together like weary neighbors, their overhanging eaves casting long shadows on the uneven lanes below. The year is one of those unremarkable turns in the calendar. Yet beneath its surface, the threads of hardship are pulling tighter. Invisible at first, like the slow fraying of a well-worn loom. You wake before dawn, as most do, to the tolling of the minster's bells, Strasbourg Cathedral, that soaring Gothic behemoth of rose window and flying buttresses, begun 2 centuries earlier and still unfinished, a reminder that even stone ambitions outlast human spans. The minster is more than stone. It is the city's pulse where you join the morning mass, kneeling on rush-strewn floors amid the murmur of Latin prayers and the flicker of beeswax candles. Religion here is not abstract. It is woven into the warp of daily survival. As a Lutheran sympathizer whispers doubts about indulgences in the shadows of the nave, you cross yourself and hurry out. For the Emperor Charles V's edicts hang heavy, and schisms brew like storm clouds over the Vosges Mountains to the west. Faith offers solace, but it is the practical rhythms of labor that anchor you. The creak of your wooden shutter as you unlatch it to the gray light. The splash of cold water from a rain barrel for your ablutions. Simple, tepid, shared with the household. Strasbourg thrives on the Rhine, that broad, silt-laden artery snaking from the Alps to the North Sea, ferrying timber, wine, and salt through its bustling quays. You might work the docks if you're sturdy enough, loading barrels of Alsatian Riesling onto flat-bottomed barges bound for Basel or Antwerp, your hands chapped from rope and river spray. The city's economy is a patchwork of guilds, the weavers with their clacking looms, producing linen for Flemish markets, the tanners knee-deep in vats of oak bark and urine, turning hides into leather boots that will trudge the trade roads for years. Fairs punctuate the seasons. The midsummer one in June draws merchants from as far as Italy, their stalls groaning under bolts of wool dyed in vibrant indigos and saffrons, spices like peppercorns that cost more than a month's wages for a laborer like you. But even in prosperity's glow, inequality simmers. The patrician families, those who control the mills and the mint, live in stone houses with glazed windows and private chapels, while you and your kin cram into upper stories of wattle and daub tenements, 6 or 8 to a room, beds shared in shifts to conserve the straw ticking. Daily life unfolds in these modest confines with a quiet tenacity that history often overlooks. Your breakfast is sparse, a hunk of dark rye bread, perhaps softened in weak ale if the well water runs brackish from upstream tanneries, and a sliver of salted pork if the harvest held. Children scurry underfoot, tasked with fetching kindling or minding the communal oven where loaves bake in rotation, their laughter a brief counterpoint to the adults' measured exchanges. Meals are communal, eaten from wooden trenchers at a trestle table that folds against the wall by day. Supper might include a pottage of leeks, barley, and whatever roots the kitchen garden yields. Turnips, mostly, boiled soft to stretch the pot. Hygiene is a luxury earned through routine. You rinse linens in the Ill River's shallows on wash days, beating them against stones until your arms ache, then hang them to dry on lines strung between gables, where they flap like surrendered flags in the humid breeze. Yet for all this ordinariness, 1518 carries the weight of recent scars. Just a year prior, in 1517, a wave of bubonic plague had swept through the city, claiming hundreds in its fevered grip. You remember the quarantines? The red crosses chalked on doors, the carts rumbling by at dusk to collect the shrouded dead, rung bells announcing their passage. The air had reeked of vinegar and burning herbs as physicians in beak-nosed masks wandered the streets, lancing buboes and prescribing theriac, that bitter electuary of viper flesh and opium meant to purge the miasma. The plague receded by winter, but its echo lingers in the thinned ranks of the guilds and the wary glances at any cough or pallor. Smallpox simmers too, a perennial thief of the young, its pustules leaving survivors pockmarked and wary. While syphilis, the French disease as the locals call it, though it spares no borders, creeps through the brothels and back alleys, its chancres and fevers a slow erosion of the body's resolve. Famine compounds these ills. The harvests of 1517 were meager, rye fields blighted by a wet spring that rotted the stalks in the sodden earth. Prices soar, bread, that staple of the poor, doubles in cost from a few pfennigs to a silver groschen, forcing you to forage the commons for dandelions and nettles, or trade labor for scraps from the almshouses. The city council, a council of 21 burghers elected from the guilds, convenes in the Rohan Palace, debating grain imports from the Palatinate while enforcing sumptuary laws to curb extravagance amid scarcity. You hear of it in tavern talk, over mugs of thin beer at the Brauhaus, where coopers and bakers gather after vespers, tales of peasants rioting in the vineyards, smashing barrels to protest tithes, or wandering vagrants from the Black Forest, hollow-eyed and begging at the gates. Social tensions fray like overtaxed rope. Jews confined to their quarter across the river face murmurs of blame for the woes, their synagogues shuttered under edict, though you know deep down it's the rains and the rats that bear the true guilt. Women bear much of this burden unseen. If you are one, say, a spinner like many, fingers flying over the distaff to twist wool into thread for the looms, your days stretch from spindle to hearth, mending nets or brewing herbal possets for the ailing. Childbirth is a gauntlet, with midwives chanting prayers over bloodied straw, and infant mortality claims half before their first name day. Yet resilience threads through it all. The neighborly loans of a sieve or a sieve of salt, the shared vigils at sickbeds where comfrey poultices and willow bark teas offer what the leeches cannot. You adapt, as Strasbourgers always have, since the city's founding as a free imperial city in 1262, wresting autonomy from bishops and counts through charters inked in careful Gothic script. By July, the heat settles like a heavy cloak. The Rhine runs low, exposing sandbars where children poke for minnows with sticks, and the air shimmers over the thatched roofs. Dust clings to your skirts as you navigate the Place Kleber, the market square alive with vendors crying their wares. Fresh eels from the canal, candles of pure tallow. The minster's shadow lengthens at noon, and you pause there perhaps, wiping sweat from your brow, joining the throng filing in for the Angelus. Whispers circulate of omens, a comet streaking the July sky, or a cow birthing a two-headed calf in the suburbs. But you dismiss them as tavern fodder, focusing instead on the ache in your back from hauling water, the gnaw of hunger that no amount of thrift can fully sate. It is on a sweltering afternoon, the 14th of July, that something shifts, subtle as a stone loosening in a wall. You are crossing the narrow street near the old almshouse, basket balanced on hip, when you notice her, a woman of middle years, plainly dressed in a kirtle of homespun wool, her face flushed not with labor, but with an odd, relentless motion. She sways, then steps, her feet tracing circles on the packed earth, arms loose at her sides as if pulled by invisible strings. No music plays, no festival calls. She is Frau Troffea, a widow you might have nodded to at market, known for her quiet ways and herbal remedies. Now she dances, alone, ceaselessly, her breath coming in measured gasps, eyes distant. Passers-by glance, then look away, attributing it to heat stroke or grief for a lost kin. You hurry on, but the image lingers, a small anomaly in the city's ordered chaos. What compels one soul to move when all around stands still? And how might such a solitary rhythm ripple outward, unnoticed at first, into the lives of hundreds? You find yourself drawn back to that same narrow street near the almshouse the following morning, the 15th of July. Your basket heavier with yesterday's unsold leeks from the market, their greens wilting slightly in the rising heat. The sun climbs steadily over the red-tiled roofs, baking the air until it shimmers, and the usual clamor of Strasbourg stirs around you. The distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer on the Quai des Bateliers, the lowing of cattle being herded toward the slaughter yards along the Fossé des Tanneurs. But today, As you round the corner past the apothecary's shop, with its bundles of dried lavender hanging in the doorway, you see her again. Frau Troffea, still moving. Her steps have not faltered through the night. A neighbor, old Herr Keller the cooper, confirms it over his garden fence, his pipe clenched between tobacco-stained teeth. She danced until the stars wheeled overhead, he says, pausing only to slump against a wall when her legs buckled, then rising as if summoned by some internal tide. No fever marks her brow. No tremor suggests the palsy that claims the elderly. It is just this relentless, solitary motion. Her skirts swirling in dusty eddies, her face set in a mask of quiet determination. Word travels as slowly and steadily as the ill river's current, seeping into the routines of your day. By midday, as you knead dough in the dim light of your kitchen, flour from the last guild allotment, coarse and flecked with chaff, you overhear the baker's wife murmuring to a customer about the poor soul bewitched by the summer vapors. It's a common enough explanation in these parts, where the humid air of July is blamed for everything from sour milk to wandering wits. You dismiss it at first, focusing instead on the practicalities. Portion in the risen loaf into careful wedges to feed your household of 5, calculating how many days it might last if the rains hold off and the prices don't climb further. Supper that evening is a thin soup of peas and onions, simmered over a peat fire in the communal hearth, shared with the widow next door who contributes a twist of salt in exchange for a share of the pot. Conversation turns to the oddity, as these things do. Someone recalls a similar affliction in the 1370s, when dancers clogged the bridges over the Rhine. But that was during the Black Death's shadow. And this feels different. Smaller, more personal, like a loose thread in the city's vast tapestry. Yet by the week's end, that thread begins to unravel further. On the 20th, as you make your way to the fish market near the Ponts Couverts, those covered bridges that span the river like the ribs of some ancient beast, you count not one, but a half-dozen figures in motion. They form a loose circle in the shade of the old grain silo, their steps mismatched, like children mimicking a maypole dance without the pole. There's young Hans, the apprentice tanner, barely 20, his apron still tied about his waist, stained with the lime used to dehair hides. Beside him, Frau Meyer the seamstress, her fingers calloused from years of plying needle and thimble, now limp at her sides as her feet shuffle forward. They do not speak much, these early dancers. When you pause to offer a gourd of small beer from your satchel, a gesture of neighborly care, Frau Meyer accepts it with a nod, her eyes glassy but grateful, sipping in shallow pulls between steps. The group has grown to 34 by the chronicles later penned by the city physician, Sebastian Brandt, though to you it feels more like a gathering of the afflicted, a quiet procession that disrupts the flow of carts and barrows without halting it entirely. Life in Strasbourg adapts around these anomalies, as it must, with the unhurried grace of those accustomed to want. The guilds continue their deliberations in the Östliche Kaufhaus, that sturdy hall of commerce where merchants tally ledgers in black ink, recording shipments of Rhenish wine in oak casks bound for the Low Countries. You might pass it on your way to the dye works, where vats bubble with madder root and indigo, the air sharp with ammonia from the stale urine collected in street buckets for mordants. Work pauses only briefly for the dancers. A foreman shoos Hans aside when his steps carry him too near the tanning pits, lest he tumble into the fetid slurry. Meals persist in their modesty. Breakfast a porridge of spelt and whey, eaten standing at the trestle while lacing sabots for the fields. Lunch a wedge of cheese wrapped in cabbage leaves, carried in a kerchief to eat under a linden tree during the noon respite. Evenings bring the family to the table, where stories of the day are exchanged like small coins. Your brother's account of a cart axle snapping on the road to Saverne. The cost of repair eating into the week's earnings. The dancers enter these tales obliquely, as curiosities rather than crises. Did you see old Troffea yet? Still at it, poor thing, like a mill wheel without grain? But beneath this steadiness, the city's undercurrents stir. The Council of 21, meeting in the dimly lit chambers of the Hôtel de Ville, receives petitions from the affected families. By late July, as the heat presses harder and the Rhine's level drops to expose the pilings of old Roman bridges submerged since the days of the legions, reports filter in of the first collapses. One woman, a laundress from the Krutenau quarter, sways into a faint during the third day of her dancing, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird under the healer's fingers. He is Master Felix Platt, the municipal physician, a man of middle years with a ledger bound in calfskin where he notes symptoms in careful Latin. Incessant chorea, without fever or convulsion, yet leading to syncope. Treatments begin modestly. Bindings of St. John's wort soaked in holy water, applied to the wrists to ward off demonic influence, or draughts of valerian root steeped in mead to calm the humors. You witness one such remedy yourself, perhaps, lingering after Mass on the 25th, when a priest from the minster anoints a dancer's forehead with chrism oil, murmuring invocations to Saint Vitus, the patron of dancers and epileptics, whose feast day in June had passed unremarked amid the harvest worries. The Church's role here is woven deep into the fabric of response, as it is in all things Strasbourg. Vespers draw larger crowds now, the nave echoing with petitions for intercession, candles multiplied on the side altars until the air grows hazy with tallow smoke. Pilgrims, those who can spare the time and coin, trickle toward the chapel of Saint Vitus at the Saverne shrine, a day's walk through the vine-terraced hills, carrying beeswax offerings molded in the shape of feet, symbols of the affliction's grip. Yet not all turn to prayer. The apothecary's shelves empty of theriac and hellebore, ground fine and mixed with wine to purge imagined toxins. Daily survival strategies sharpen. Families ration the dancers' portions, substituting breadcrumbs soaked in broth for solid food, while neighbors take turns watching the afflicted, lest they wander into the river or collapse unseen in an alley. Resilience shows in these small acts, the way a cooper reinforces a daughter's palate with extra straw so she might rest between episodes, or how the bakers donate day-old loaves to the almshouse, where the worst cases are housed in straw-lined stalls like convalescent livestock. As August dawns, the circle widens inexorably. From 34, the number swells to 100, then 2, threading through the Place Gutenberg, where printing presses clack under Gutenberg's shadow. Strasbourg, after all, the city that birthed movable type, now printing broadsheets warning of the Chorea Sancti Vitae, the dance of Saint Vitus. You navigate these crowds carefully on your errands, stepping aside as a knot of dancers eddies around the fountain, their footfalls a muffled patter on the stones. The air carries a new undernote, not just the river's silt and the bakery's yeast, but the faint, sour edge of unwashed bodies, sweat mingling with the dust. Children mimic the steps in play, twirling in the dooryards until scolded, while elders shake their heads over evening pipes, recalling famines past, when want drove folk to queerer habits still. The council, pressed by guild masters whose workshops falter with absent hands, convenes more urgently. In the Öffentliche Bibliothek's archives, decrees are drafted on vellum, sealed with the city's two-headed eagle. Music shall be provided, they resolve, to exhaust the poison through further motion. Drummers and pipers, hired from the town band, set up rough stages in the squares, platforms of sawn planks nailed hastily, draped in guild banners faded from last Shrovetide. It is an odd prescription, born of Galenic humors where excess hot blood demands release. But you hear the first strains one afternoon. A simple reel on fife and tabor, tentative at first, then insistent, drawing a few dancers nearer like moths to a lantern. By week's end, the stages host dozens, the music a steady pulse under the linden trees, while physicians like Platt tally the fallen, 15 in the first month, hearts giving out or limbs seizing in the unrelenting cadence. In this measured escalation, where labor's wheel turns even as bodies falter, one wonders, as the dancers multiply and the city's response hardens into ritual, will the rhythm bind the afflicted in release, or merely echo the deeper strains that birthed it? You stand once more in the Place Kleber, as September's milder breezes begin to stir the linden leaves overhead, carrying the faint, crisp scent of early apples from the market stalls that have reclaimed their spots after the summer's disruptions. The square, once a reluctant stage for the dancers' endless procession, now hosts the more familiar bustle of vendors arranging their wares. Pyramids of cabbages with hearts as tight as fists, bundles of leeks tied with twine, and the occasional wheel of cheese wrapped in clean linen, its rind dusted with ash to ward off mites. The stages, those makeshift platforms of splintered oak and faded banners, have been dismantled by the guild carpenters, their planks repurposed for the coming wine harvest, where they'll form the presses that squeeze the vintage from the Riesling grapes in the nearby hills. The Rhine, swelled by autumn rains, laps higher against the quays, its barges groaning under loads of firewood stacked like cordwood, destined for hearths that will soon ward off the chill. Yet the memory of the heat lingers in the collective breath of the city, a subtle undercurrent that colors conversations at the evening hearth, where families gather around pots of barley stew simmered with foraged mushrooms, portioned out with wooden spoons worn smooth from generations of use. The plague's crescendo came in August's final weeks, when the afflicted numbered 400 strong, a figure etched into the annals by Master Platt and his assistants, who tallied it in ledgers stained with ink and sweat, cross-referenced against guild rolls to account for the lost hands in workshops and fields. You recall it not as a spectacle of chaos, but as a gradual thickening of the air, like fog rolling in from the river on dewy mornings. The dancers, no longer solitary figures in alleys, but a diffuse crowd weaving through the streets, formed eddies around the guild halls and the minster's portals. Their steps had synchronized somewhat under the piper's relentless reels, simple tunes on bone flutes and calfskin drums, passed down from medieval carols but stripped to a hypnotic drone, repeating measures of 3 beats like the measured toll of a passing bell. Physicians, clad in their woolen robes with pouches of herbs slung at their belts, circulated among them, offering tinctures of betony and skullcap diluted in rainwater, administered via horn spoons to parched lips. These remedies, drawn from the pharmacopoeias of Avicenna translated into the vulgar tongues, aimed to cool the overheated spirits, thought to drive the limbs astray. Though many went untouched, the dancers' focus inward, their breaths sinking to the rhythm as if it were a shared pulse. Survival in those days hinged on these quiet adaptations, the kind that history books gloss over in favor of decrees and dates. Families of the afflicted improvised litters from cart shafts and sacking, wheeling their kin to the edges of the city walls, where the air was fresher and the crowds thinner. Open spaces like the orangery meadows, now trampled to mud under hundreds of feet. There, under the watchful eyes of volunteer watchers, often the hale elders or off-duty watchmen, paid a pittance in rye loaves. The dancers continued, collapsing in heaps to be revived with vinegar cloths on brows or infusions of chamomile tea brewed in camp kettles over peat fires. You might have been one of those watchers yourself, if your trade allowed the time, sitting on a stool carved from a sawn log, mending a net or darning hose by the light of a rush wick dipped in tallow, your ears attuned to the soft thuds of falls amid the ceaseless patter. Meals for the watchers were frugal relays. A flask of small beer passed hand to hand. Crusts of pain de campagne smeared with drippings from a shared goose if the harvest guild donated, or wild sorrel plucked from the river banks to chew against the thirst. Resilience manifested in these exchanges, the murmured reassurances to a daughter whose mother twitched in exhausted sleep, or the bartered stories that bridged the long afternoons. Tales of ancestors who endured the 1348 pestilence by sealing windows with wax and reciting litanies until dawn. The council's interventions, pragmatic as a tanner's knife, evolved with the crisis. By mid-August, as reports of deaths mounted, 15 per day at the peak, hearts faltering under the strain or limbs seizing into cramps that no liniment could loosen, the decree on music was tempered with caution. Platforms sprouted not just in the squares, but along the ramparts, where the stone parapets offered some barrier against collisions, and herbalists were conscripted to distribute hellebore purges, that emetic root ground with honey to induce vomiting of the dancing venom. Burials proceeded with the city's quiet efficiency. Carts drawn by patient oxen at twilight, bodies shrouded in unbleached linen procured from the weaver's surplus, interred in the St. Thomas Cemetery under simple crosses of pine shaved with draw knives. No grand funerals for the poor. Instead, a priest's hurried asperges with holy water from a brass sprinkler, and a tolling of the small bell that summoned the gravediggers from their suppers of lentil pottage and rye. The dead were tallied anonymously in the parish rolls, danced to rest. their passing a line inked beside baptisms and marriages, a reminder that life in Strasbourg cycled onward, births outpacing losses by the skin of autumn's teeth. As the leaves turn, the first signs of abatement appear, subtle as the first frost etching the well buckets. By early September, the piper's wages, 2 pfennigs a session plus a midday bowl of peas porridge, are withheld for those whose tunes go unheeded, the dancers thinning as if the fever had broken. Families reclaim their spaces, hauling the afflicted home on borrowed sledges over the cobbles, where they are bedded with bolsters stuffed from last year's flax and dosed with tonics of elderberry cordial to rebuild strength. Platt's final ledger notes a cessation by October. The last stragglers, perhaps a dozen, including a stubborn old vintner who persisted into the grape-picking, fading like echoes in the minster's nave. The city exhales, guilds reconvene full muster, looms clacking once more to the rhythm of shuttles rather than feet, and the markets swell with the first casks of new wine, its tartness a toast to endurance. In the quiet aftermath, you reflect on the toll as you stir the October pottage. Cabbage and beans simmered with a ham bone borrowed from the neighbor's smokehouse, its broth stretched with handfuls of barley to feed the lingering invalids. The plague claimed perhaps 400 souls, though estimates vary in the chronicles, their absence a hollow in the choir lofts and the dye vats, where hands once nimble now rest in the earth. Yet Strasbourg mends, as it did after the plagues of yore. Alms collections swell the church coffers for widows' dowries, and the council drafts ordinances for better grain stores. Vaults dug deeper under the city walls to hoard against future blights. Modern eyes peering through the lens of physicians like Paracelsus, who would later decry the dance of St. Vitus, as ergot poisoning from rye fields, tainted by the fungus Claviceps purpurea, its sclerotia grinding into flour, unleashing convulsions masked as merriment. See the threads of cause in the famine's wake. But to you, in 1518, it was the weight of want, the humors unbalanced by scarcity and sorrow, that drove the body to revolt in steps rather than screams. This episode, a footnote in the grand sweep of the Renaissance's dawning light, underscores the fragility of the ordinary. How a city's survival hinges not on king's decrees, but on the shared sieve of a neighbor's kindness, the timely harvest that fills the communal pot. It echoes into our own time, where stresses unseen, pandemics born of global threads, or the quiet erosions of isolation, might yet coax strange rhythms from the crowd. In an age of screens and solitude, one pauses to wonder, if hardship stirred Strasbourg to dance, what silent cadences might we tread unnoticed in our own unyielding days? Picture yourself in the gentle undulations of northwestern Tanganyika in the crisp dawn of January 1962, where the air carries the earthy promise of the rainy season's approach, mingled with the faint, acrid smoke from cooking fires scattered across the red clay compounds of Kashasha village. You are not a distant observer, but one of the young women threading through this modest world, perhaps a 14-year-old boarder at the Kashasha Girls' Middle School, your dormitory cot shared with a sister from the next village, its thin kapok mattress warmed by the shared body heat of the night. The school, a cluster of whitewashed buildings erected by the Catholic White Fathers Mission a decade earlier, stands on a low hill overlooking Lake Victoria's shimmering expanse. its tin roofs glinting under the equatorial sun that rises without fanfare, painting the papyrus-fringed shores in hues of gold and indigo. Kashasha is no bustling Dar es Salaam with its harbor cranes and ministerial offices. It is a rural outpost in the Bukoba district, where the Haya people, farmers and fishermen whose ancestors etched terraced fields into the volcanic slopes, live in rhythms dictated by the lake's tides and the coffee bush's cycles. Here, in this corner of the newly minted nation, independence is still a fresh ink on the wind. Tanganyika having shaken off British colonial rule just a month prior, on December 9, 1961, under Julius Nyerere's quiet leadership. The Union Jack has been furled, replaced by the black, green, and yellow flag fluttering from the mission flagpole. But the undercurrents of change lap at the edges of daily existence like the lake's persistent waves. Your morning begins before the cocks crow, as it does for most in the dormitory. A long, low structure of mud brick walls reinforced with eucalyptus poles, its windows screened against the mosquitoes that hum like distant engines through the humid nights. You rise from your cot, folding the thin cotton sheet with care. These linens, stamped with the mission's crest, are laundered weekly in the communal washhouse down the hill, where girls like you kneel by galvanized tubs, scrubbing with bars of sunlight soap imported from Kenya, their suds foaming pink from the laterite soil that stains everything it touches. Breakfast waits in the refectory, a porridge of millet or maize, cooked in cast-iron pots over open wood fires, its bland warmth broken only by a spoonful of groundnut paste if the stores allow. Eaten from enamel bowls that clatter on the long trestle tables, portions are measured by the matron, Sister Maria, a Belgian nun in her starched habit, her portions doled with a wooden ladle to ensure nothing is wasted. Survival here is a lesson in thrift, learned from the lean harvests when banana wilt strikes the plantations or the lake yields fewer tilapia after a dry spell. The school serves about 200 girls, drawn from villages within a day's walk, their uniforms, simple navy pinafores over white blouses, knee-length socks pulled up despite the heat. A uniform echo of colonial efficiency now rebranded under national pride. Classes commence at 8, after the flag-raising assembly in the dusty quadrangle, where the headmistress, Mrs. Kamugisha, a Haya woman trained in Makerere College, leads the pledge to the new republic. Hands on hearts, voices rising in Swahili choruses that blend with the calls of fish eagles wheeling overhead. The curriculum is a bridge between worlds. Arithmetic on slates imported from India, blackboards chalked with equations that promise clerical jobs in the emerging civil service, geography lessons tracing Tanganyika's borders on faded maps, from the Serengeti Plains to the clove-scented isles of Zanzibar, and Bible studies in the mission chapel, its pews of polished mango wood creaking under the weight of recitations from the good book, translated into Kihaya for those whose Swahili is halting. You sit in the third row, perhaps, your notebook, a precious exercise book with blue-lined pages, bought from the village duka with earnings from weeding the coffee shrubs, filled with careful script, the ink from a fountain pen that leaks if not wiped after use. Daily life orbits these routines with a quiet persistence that binds the community. Afternoons bring domestic science in the kitchen block, where you learn to knead ugali from cassava flour, its doughy mass shaped into fist-sized balls to dip into sukuma wiki. Collard greens simmered with onions and tomatoes from the school garden. A plot of loamy soil tilled with hoes forged in the local smithy. Survival strategies are implicit here. The garden's irrigation furrows, dug with pangas and lined with banana leaves to retain moisture, teach water conservation amid the erratic rains. The communal mending circle after supper, where needles flash under hurricane lanterns fueled by paraffin bought in bulk from the Asian traders in Bukoba town, repairs hems torn on the rocky paths home. Letters from family arrive sporadically, carried by the post runner on his Raleigh bicycle, their wax-sealed envelopes bearing news of the village. A brother's circumcision ceremony planned for the dry season, or the communal labor to repair the thatched roofs before the March downpours. You reply in careful English, practicing the phrases that might one day secure a posting as a teacher in a district school, far from the lake's malarial mists. Yet beneath this ordered surface, the tremors of transition ripple. Independence has brought freedoms. Women like Mrs. Kamugisha rising to headmistress roles once reserved for expatriates, but also pressures. The mission schools, long arms of colonial education, now grapple with Nyarere's vision of Ujamaa, communal self-reliance that urges curricula toward practical agriculture over rote Latin. Whispers in the dormitory after lights out, when the kerosene lamps are doused and you huddle under mosquito nets strung from the rafters, turn to these shifts, the new national service that might call boys to barracks, pulling them from the fields. The land reforms that redistribute plots once held by absentee chiefs, stirring old clan resentments like silt from the lakebed. Girls bear their share quietly, ambitions tempered by expectations of marriage, the bride price in goats or hoes negotiated in the family compound, where elders sit under the shade of the mango tree, their pipes drawing on tobacco rolled in newspaper from the Daily Nation. Health is another fragile thread. The dispensary in Bukoba, 25 miles away, stocks quinine for the malaria that flares with the rains. Its bitter pills swallowed with water fetched from the standpipe. But tetanus from rusty nails in the banana groves claims the unwary, and the occasional bout of bilharzia from swimming in the lake's weedy shallows leaves bellies swollen and livers scarred. January 30th dawns like any other, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth from an overnight shower, the paths to school slick with mud that cakes your sandals, simple rubber flip-flops molded from tire scraps, traded at the market for a bunch of matoke bananas. Assembly proceeds as usual, the flag's hoist accompanied by the rustle of pinafores in the breeze off the water, but by mid-morning, in the Form 2 classroom with its walls of unpainted plaster and desks scarred by generations of initials carved with penknives, something shifts. You are there, seated beside your friend Amina, her plaits tied with ribbons from her sister's wedding, when it begins. 3 girls at the back, Rose, Miriam, and another whose name fades in the retellings, start with a shared giggle over a past note, perhaps a doodle of the strict arithmetic master with his fly whisk. But the giggle stretches, unspooling into peals that echo off the corrugated iron ceiling, their faces flushing not with embarrassment, but with an uncontrollable tide, tears streaming as they clutch desks, bodies convulsing in mirth that borders on sob. The teacher, Mr. Mawita, pauses his lesson on fractions, his chalk hovering, assuming at first it's the usual mischief of idle hands. He sends them to the headmistress's office, but as they stumble out, skirts askew, the laughter infects the room like a yawn in a quiet queue. First one classmate, then two, their voices joining in a chorus that drowns the blackboard's equations. By lunch, the refectory is a scene of subdued chaos, the ugali untouched on the tables, bowls overturned in haste, as a dozen girls now weep and wheeze in corners, attended by the matrons with cool cloths wrung from the wash-house buckets. Sister Maria administers the only remedy at hand, strong tea brewed from the mission's tea bushes, steeped long in the samovar and sweetened with a precious lump of sugar from the stores, meant to steady nerves frayed by the heat. The affected are isolated in the sick bay, a verandaed annex with cots draped in mosquito netting, where they lie panting, the laughter subsiding to hiccups after hours that feel like days. Rumors circulate among the hail, a curse from the lake spirits, angered by the new flag, or tainted maize from the last harvest, its kernels harboring some invisible blight. You watch from the quadrangle, helping to fan the afflicted with folded exercise books, your own throat tight with unspoken fear. Fear not of demons, but of the fragility this reveals. How one unchecked ripple can unsettle the careful order of lessons and chores. In the hush of that first evening, as the sun dips behind the acacia groves and the lake mirrors the fading sky, the school quiets earlier than usual, the dormitory lights doused by 7 to conserve paraffin. Lying awake on your cot, the netting tucked tight against the night's chill, you listen to the muffled bursts from the sick bay, faint echoes that carry on the breeze. What hidden strains in this time of new beginnings might coax such a sound from the body? And how far could its cadence travel before the village itself begins to tremble? You linger in the quadrangle that first evening after the laughter's onset, the sky deepening to a bruised indigo over the lake, where the silhouettes of fishermen in their Ngalawa canoes, hollowed fig trees balanced with outriggers, slice the glassy surface on their return from the evening nets. The air cools slightly, carrying the briny tang of drying tilapia laid out on reed mats by the shore. But the day's humidity clings to your pinafore like a second skin, and you fan yourself absently with your exercise book, its pages warped from the damp. The sick bay veranda hums with low voices, matrons murmuring in Kihaya to the afflicted girls, who now number closer to 20, their bursts of hilarity subsiding into exhausted whimpers, faces streaked with tears, and the faint red imprints of clutching hands. Sister Maria moves among them with the steady gait of long practice, distributing sips from a shared enamel jug of rehydration solution. A simple mix of boiled water, a pinch of salt from the lakeside evaporators, and boiled banana peels for potassium, a remedy pieced together from mission medical manuals and local lore. It's the kind of improvisation that defines life here. No grand hospital in Bukoba can spare a doctor for what seems a passing fancy, so the school adapts, converting the storage room adjacent to the sick bay into a makeshift ward, its shelves cleared of spare linens to make space for additional cots borrowed from the boys' secondary school 2 miles down the rutted track. By the following morning, February 1st, the ripple has widened, as ripples do in still water. Assembly is cancelled. Mrs. Ma Kamagisha's voice over the crackling loudspeaker, rigged from a salvaged radio set, announces it with a composure that belies the worry etching her brow. And classes proceed in hushed halves, the unaffected girls like you paired off in the library. A dim room with shelves of dog-eared primers donated by the British Council. Their pages yellowed from the termite nibbles that plague the wooden frames. You sit with Amina at a low table scarred by ink blots, attempting to conjugate verbs in Swahili, ninaenda for I am going, repeated like a mantra to anchor the mind. But the sounds from the quadrangle intrude, fresh peels joining the fray, first from the Form 3 dorm, then spilling into the kitchen block where the cooks, women from the village with headscarves tied against the wood smoke, abandon their stirring pots of posho to clutch their sides. One of them, Mama Zuberi, a stout figure known for her ugali that never stuck to the sufuria, is among the first adults taken. Her laughter starts as a chuckle over a spilled sack of beans, then swells until she slumps against the mud brick wall, gasping for air amid the scattered lentils that crunch underfoot like tiny accusations. The spread quickens through the day's routines, turning the school's careful order into a mosaic of interruptions. Lunch in the refectory becomes a staggered affair. The hale eat first at the trestle tables, their portions of cassava leaves stewed with ground nuts and a ladle of beans from the common pot, eaten with fingers dipped in the shared ugali mound, while watchers ferry trays to the isolated. Survival here leans on these relays, girls rotating shifts to tend the garden, hoeing the rows of sukuma wiki with pangas dulled from use, ensuring the greens continue to yield against the blight that yellows the outer leaves, or mending the mosquito nets in the mending circle. Threads of cotton floss pulled taut under needle's eye, a task that steadies trembling hands. Personal stories emerge in the lulls. Amina confides over her half-eaten posho about her cousin in the next village, who once laughed through a fever from hookworm, the body's way of expelling the worm's grip, or so the village healer claimed with his bundle of herbs and incantations. You share your own, your mother's tales of the 1950s locust plagues, when laughter was a rare spark amid the stripped fields, families sharing jokes around the fire to ward off despair. These exchanges, whispered under the acacias during water breaks from the standpipe, its flow rationed to 2 jerry cans per dorm to conserve the pump's seals, foster a quiet resilience, the kind that stitches communities through unseen tears. Word reaches the village proper by dusk, carried on the feet of parents summoned by runner. Young boys on battered bicycles, their tires patched with inner tube rubber and propelled by legs browned from the sun. Kashasha village, a loose cluster of compounds encircled by banana groves and coffee shrubs heavy with unripe cherries, responds with the measured caution of those versed in ailments born of the land. The headman, Bwana Kabalimu, convenes the elders under the baobab tree in the central clearing, its trunk girth a testament to centuries of counsel, where they sit on low stools carved from fallen limbs, pipes drawing on hand-rolled tobacco leaves wrapped in maize husks. Decisions are deliberative. No quarantine yet, for the mission road is the village's vein to the school. But families are advised to withhold visits, sending instead bundles of fresh matoke via the runners, the green bananas wrapped in banana leaves to ripen slowly in the dormitory kitchens. Meals in the village adapt too. Communal suppers of roasted maize cobs and roasted goat, if a neighbor slaughters for the occasion. The meat portioned with bush knives and shared on platters of woven reeds, a gesture to bolster the school's stores without stirring panic. By mid-February, the affliction has breached the school's walls, threading into the village like smoke from a hidden fire. It starts with the market women at the weekly duka, haggling over bolts of kiteng cloth imported from Mwanza, their laughter erupting mid-barter over the price of a tin of kerosene. Then the fishermen mending their gill nets by the lakeshore, their chuckles turning to convulsions that tangle the monofilament lines in heaps. The dispensary in Kashasha, a thatched outpost with a zinc roof stocked by the district medical officer, sees its first cases, afflicted laid on rush mats, dosed with phenobarbital tablets dissolved in boiled water. The bitter syrup administered via dropper to calm the neural storms, though supplies dwindle quickly, rationed to 1 vial per household. Healers from the hills arrive with their satchels of muti, dried roots of the masasa tree ground into pastes, smeared on foreheads with chicken feathers, or infusions of aloe ferox simmered in clay pots to purge the evil spirits of change. You witness one such blending of ways during a supervised visit to the sick bay, where a village nganga chants over Rose, the originator, her body arched in a fresh wave, the smoke from his smoldering herbs mingling with the sharp scent of the nuns' carbolic soap. The district administration in Bukoba stirs by the month's end, a telegram dispatched to the ministry in Dar es Salaam on yellowed forms typed on an underwood machine, its ribbon faded from disuse. Mrs. Kamugisha, ever the bridge between worlds, compiles reports in her office, a partitioned room in the headmistress's bungalow, its desk piled with carbon copies and ledgers bound in marbled board, detailing the spread. 100 girls by February 15th, then spilling to 50 villagers. The laughter a contagion that leaps not through touch, but through the invisible bonds of shared spaces, the dormitory whispers, the market's press. Classes halt entirely on the 20th. The blackboards wiped clean and covered with dust sheets, while the unaffected like you are tasked with inventory. Tallying the rice sacks in the stores, 48, each holding 50 kilos, their burlap stamped from the cooperative union, or cataloging the library's volumes for relocation to safer shelves. Personal tolls mount quietly. Amina's aunt, a coffee picker, succumbs to exhaustion after days without rest, her body carried home on a litter of branches lashed with sisal rope, mourned with a vigil of millet beer, poured libations at the compound gate. As March looms, with its promise of heavier rains that will turn the paths to quagmires and swell the lake's weedy margins, the epidemic crests at nearly 1,000 across the district. The school's gates padlocked with a chain from the tool shed, its classes shuttered like a book mid-chapter. The air hums with unanswered questions, letters to the regional medical officer going unanswered amid the capital's post-independence bustle. But in the enforced idleness, you and the others mend what you can. Nets for the fishermen, hems for the uniforms that may never see assembly again. Yet as the laughter's waves lap higher, threatening to submerge the routines that once held firm, one ponders. In this tide of mirth turned torment, What anchor of tradition or science might steady the shore before the village's very heart begins to unravel? You find yourself in the lengthening shadows of mid-March 1962, the rainy season now in full measure, its downpours transforming the paths around Kashasha into rivulets of red mud that cake the hems of your pinafore and turn every step into a deliberate negotiation with the slick earth. The lake, swollen by the deluge, laps higher against the papyrus reeds, its surface dimpled by sheets of rain that drum steadily on the tin roofs of the school buildings, now shuttered and silent like a village holding its breath. The quadrangle, once a hub of assembly and play, has become a makeshift encampment. Tents of canvas tarpaulins stretched over eucalyptus frames, borrowed from the district agricultural office's stores, sheltering clusters of the afflicted who have outlasted the initial wave. Water collects in shallow pools on the ground, reflecting the overcast sky, and you move carefully among them, distributing portions from the communal pot, a thin gruel of maize meal and pumpkin leaves, stirred with a wooden paddle in a cauldron set over a 3-stone fire, its flames fed with branches snapped from the acacias that line the hill. The aroma is faintly sweet, the pumpkin sourced from the village gardens where women, their headscarves sodden, continue to till despite the wet, their pangas slicing through the sodden soil to unearth tubers that might yet save the season's yield. The climax of the epidemic unfolds not in grand gestures, but in the incremental ebbing of its hold, a process as gradual as the lake's retreat after flood. By late March, the district medical officer, Dr. Mahalu, arrives from Bukoba in a Land Rover splashed with mud from the graded road, its engine coughing to a halt in the school's drive. He is a man of quiet competence, his khaki trousers tucked into gumboots, a stethoscope looped around his neck like a talisman, carrying crates of supplies from the central pharmacy, bottles of chlorpromazine syrup in amber glass, labeled in faded ink to sedate the neural overexcitement, and packets of oral rehydration salts, their foil torn open to mix with boiled rainwater in enamel basins. Under his direction, the sick bay expands into the old assembly hall, its pews pushed aside to form rows of cots draped with fresh mosquito netting, linens boiled in the wash-house cauldrons with soda ash to kill the mites that thrive in the damp. You assist in these preparations, perhaps, folding the netting with careful pleats to tuck under the mattresses stuffed with dried banana fiber, a task that occupies the hands while the mind absorbs the healer's explanations. Mass psychogenic illness, he calls it in measured Swahili, a response to stress where the body's signals mimic contagion, though the villagers nod politely, attributing it still to the spirits unsettled by the flag's change. Resolution comes through these layered efforts, the climax a plateau rather than a peak, as cases peak at around 1,000 across the Bukoba district by April's threshold. Schools closed from Kashasha to the Kenyan border, markets thinned to whispers of barter over empty baskets. The school's gates, chained since February, creak open for inspections. Dr. Mahalu's team, augmented by nurses from the Lutheran mission in Muleba, conducts rounds with thermometers clicked under tongues and pulses counted against stopwatches, their notebooks filling with entries on symptoms, paroxysms lasting 2 to 4 hours, followed by somnolent recovery, no fevers or rashes to suggest toxin or virus. Treatments blend worlds, The chlorpromazine dosed in careful milliliters via syringes sterilized over the fire, its sedative haze easing the afflicted into sleep. Alongside the Nganga's rituals, where bundles of empule herbs, bitter vines ground into pastes, are applied to the soles of feet, believed to ground the wandering humors. Survival strategies evolve in tandem. Families rotate caregiving shifts. Husbands from the coffee plots walking the 5-mile tracks at dawn with baskets of boiled eggs and mangoes from the roadside trees, their yolks pale but nourishing, traded for updates scrawled on scraps of newsprint from the Sunday Nation. In the village compounds, suppers stretch thinner, ugali molded smaller, dipped sparingly into peanut sauce simmered with wild greens foraged from the rain-soaked underbrush. But resilience shines in the shared labor. Women weaving new reed mats for the cots, their fingers interlacing the strips with the steady rhythm of generations. Or elders recounting tales of the 1940s sleeping sickness epidemics, when entire villages mobilized to trap tsetse flies in oil-smeared traps, turning peril into communal purpose. Personal stories anchor this turning, threads of endurance woven into the broader fabric. Rose, the Form 2 girl whose note sparked the first giggles, recovers by early April in the sick bay, her laughter fading to occasional twitches that Dr. Mahelu notes as residual echoes. She returns to her dorm cot, weakened but whole, her plaits rebraided by Amina with ribbons salvaged from the sewing class scraps, a quiet reclamation of normalcy. Mama Zuberi, the cook whose collapse scattered the beans, spends weeks in a village hut, tended by her daughters who brewed ginger tisanes from rhizomes dug fresh, the steam carrying their scent through the thatch to mingle with the rain's petrichor. No deaths are recorded. Unlike the dancing plagues of old Europe, this hysteria spares the body its final toll, but the absences linger. Lessons postponed, harvests thinned by hands pulled from the fields, the district's education quota unmet as parents keep daughters home, wary of the unseen currents. The school reopens piecemeal in May, with half-days in the drier classrooms, blackboards dusted and chalked anew, the curriculum resuming with hygiene modules on contagion's myths, taught via flannel graphs with cutouts of germs and masks. The final outcomes settle like silt after the flood. By June, the epidemic has receded across Tanganyika, the last cases flickering out in isolated villages like embers under ash, with the ministry in Dar es Salaam issuing a terse bulletin in the Uhuru newspaper. Stress from rapid change cited, no further alarm. Kashasha resumes its pulse, the flag raised at assembly, its colors vivid against the post-rain sky. The refectory pots bubbling once more with posho and beans, portions restored as the cooperative trucks rumble in with maize sacks stamped from the Arusha silos. Mrs. Kamugisha's ledgers close the chapter with tallies. 200 girls affected at the school. Recovery rates near total through rest and suggestion. The incident a case study in her annual report to the Education Board, typed on carbon paper for duplicates sent to Nyerere's office. The village men's too, coffee cherries picked in the July dry, their red husks pulped by hand-cranked machines to yield beans for export. The earnings pooled for a new standpipe pump, its iron handle gleaming against future droughts. Resilience here is the quiet harvest, not in heroes, but in the ordinary acts. The mended nets cast wider into the lake, the shared recipes for tisanes that blend old roots with new salts, this forgotten footnote in Tanganyika's young independence, overshadowed by the Arusha Declaration's communal calls 2 years hence. Whispers of how transitions test the soul's quiet corners. In an era of decolonization's heady rush, it reveals the body's rebellion against the unseen weights, cultural shifts, educational pressures, the fraying of traditions under national cloth. Today, as global tides of change lap at digital shores, one reflects, if laughter could unspool a village in 1962, what subtle stresses might yet unravel our own woven lives, and how shall we mend them before the echoes fade entirely? Imagine yourself settled into the gentle contours of Oxfordshire in the crisp autumn of 1888, where the air holds the faint, nutty scent of ripening chestnuts from the hedgerows that lace the rolling downs like stitches in a well-worn quilt. You are not a lord of the manor or a scholar from the dreaming spires of Oxford, 10 miles to the south, but one of the ordinary folk who coax a living from the chalky soil, perhaps a tenant shepherd on a modest farm near Chipping Norton, your days measured by the slow graze of your flock across the stubbled pastures that stretch under wide, unhurried skies. Oxfordshire, this heartland of England's wool trade since the days of the Domesday Book 8 centuries prior, is a landscape of quiet industry. Fields divided by dry stone walls built from local limestone, their gaps mended annually with fresh-laid turves cut from the verges and scattered copses of beech and oak that drop their mast for the pigs to forage in the underleaf. The county's economy turns on sheep, the South Down and Cotswold breeds prized for their dense fleeces that feed the looms of Banbury and Whitney, turning raw wool into blankets and broadcloth bound for London markets or export to the colonies. Life here, in this patchwork of enclosures forged by the Enclosure Acts of the 18th and early 19th centuries, is a cycle of unremarkable persistence, where the flock's wool clip in June sustains the family through the leaner months, and the lambing in February brings a fragile promise of renewal. Your morning unfolds with the pale light filtering through the small paned window of your cottage, a low-beamed structure of wattle and daub, its walls whitewashed with lime slaked in the farmyard ash pit, the thatch overhead renewed every 7 years from the rye straw of the previous harvest. You rise from the box bed, its mattress stuffed with chaff and layered with homespun ticking, shared with your spouse in the single room that serves as parlor, kitchen, and sleeping quarters for the children huddled on a pallet by the hearth. Breakfast is simple fare. A porridge of oatmeal simmered overnight in the crook of the chimney crane, stirred with a wooden spurtle and sweetened with a dribble of treacle from the stone jar. Eaten from earthenware bowls at the scrubbed oak table while the fire, fueled by faggots of hawthorn gathered in the coppice, pops softly against the soot-blackened inglenook. Portions are portioned with thrift in mind. The treacle, bought in bulk from the village chandler in Chipping Norton, is measured by the spoonful to stretch until the next market day, a reminder of the potato famines that echoed from Ireland just decades past, tightening belts even in these fertile downs. From there, the day's labor calls you to the fields, where your flock, say, 200 ewes and their lambs, marked with rattle paint in the shepherd's crook to denote ownership, dots the pasture like scattered commas on the green page. You carry the crook, its ash handle worn smooth from years of leaning, and a nosebag of hay for the working dog, a collie named Jess. Her coat clipped short against the burrs that snag in the thistles. The routine is etched deep. Dawn rounds to check the hurdles, portable fences of woven hazel wands lashed with bramble ties that pen the sheep overnight against foxes and the occasional stray from neighboring folds. Then the drive to fresh grazing, Jess's low whistles herding the stragglers across the dew-slicked turf, their hooves leaving faint imprints in the short-cropped sward. Meals interrupt sparingly. Elevences a hunk of bread and cheese from the satchel, Shropshire blue, its veins marbled from the dairy where your wife churns with a dash churn. The whey saved for the pig's swill, and a flask of small beer drawn from the stone bottle sunk in the farm well. Its coolness a small mercy against the midday sun that beats down on the open downs. Oxfordshire's rural life in the late Victorian era is one of these incremental securities built on the reforms of the agricultural revolution, crop rotation in the arable strips, with wheat following clover to fix the nitrogen in the chalky loam, and the selective breeding of sheep by men like Bakewell, whose long wools now dominate the folds, their fleeces yielding up to 10 pounds per shear. You know the seasons by their tolls, the clipping in June, where the shearers arrive with their hand shears, blades clicking like castanets as they skirt the fleece in one unbroken sheet. The wool rolled into twists and bagged for the factor's cart. The dipping in July, ewes plunged into vats of arsenic-laced Stockholm tar to ward off the liver fluke from the water meadows. And the tupping in autumn when the rams are introduced to the ewes, their vigor tested by the crook's prod. Survival strategies are woven into these tasks. The communal clipping gangs that share the labor and the ale, reducing the day's wage from a shilling to a shared supper of mutton stew simmered with carrots from the cottage garden, or the careful marking of lambs with ear notches, a V for the ewe's dam, a slit for the year, to trace bloodlines amid the losses to foot rot, or the occasional wolfish dog from the railway navvies' camps. Personal stories color these days. Your father's tale of the 1879 foot and mouth outbreak, when the county's herds were culled by order of the Privy Council, inspectors in black coats tallying the pyres with lime and kerosene, leaving families to subsist on the parish relief of a loaf and a pint from the Union workhouse, its spiked gates a grim threshold. By November, the year wanes with a hush, the downs misted in the mornings, the hawthorn hedges stripped of berries by the thrushes, and the first frosts etching the water troughs where you break the ice with a mallet before filling from the hand pump, its iron spout groaning against the cold. The flock is folded closer now, hurdles drawn tight around the night pens of chestnut paling driven into the turf with a maul, to guard against the chill winds that sweep from the Cotswolds. Supper in the cottage is hardier against the dropping temperatures. A pie of mutton scraps from the autumn cull, its pastry of suet and flour crimped with a fork and baked in the Dutch oven swung over the fire, accompanied by pickled beets from the stone crocks in the cellar, their vinegar tang cutting the richness. The children, 3 perhaps, with the eldest apprenticed to the blacksmith in Charlbury, gather round the table, their hands washed in the basin of rainwater caught from the roof gutters, stories exchanged of the village fair last Michaelmas, where the coconut shies and gingerbread stalls offered rare gaiety amid the tithe audits that pinched the parson's due from the harvest yield. November 3rd dawns clear, but with a heaviness in the air, the barometer in the farm kitchen. A brass instrument hung by the window, its needle twitching like a hesitant finger, dipping lower than usual, hinting at the pressure fronts that brew over the Atlantic. Your rounds proceed as ever, mending a gap in the hedge with billhook and brash. The clippings stacked for kindling, checking the yews for signs of casting, turning the heavy ones with a gentle heave to prevent bloat from the damp grass. By evening, as the sun sinks early behind the spires of distant church towers, those Norman remnants from the wool baron's era, you secure the flock in their pen, the hurdles lashed with withes of willow osier cut fresh from the brookside, Jess circling with a final bark to settle the restless. Supper passes in the fire's glow, the mutton pie portioned with the carving knife honed on the whetstone, its blade singing softly, while outside the wind whispers through the thatch, carrying the faint lowing of cattle from the next holding. Around 8 o'clock, as you bank the fire with slack coal from the hod, raked smooth to smolder through the night, and douse the tallow dips in their sconces, the first anomaly stirs. A low rumble, perhaps, too faint for thunder, vibrating through the flagstone floor like the distant passage of a goods train on the Great Western Line to London. You pause at the door, peering into the dark yard where the stars prick the velvet sky. But all seems still. The silhouette of the barn against the horizon, the pump's shadow elongated by the rising moon. Then, from the pen, a shift. A single ew's bleat, sharp and urgent, answered by a chorus that swells like yeast in dough. The flock surging against the hurdles in a wave of wool and panic. What unseen tremor in the night could unsettle the quiet fields, turning guardians of the downs into fugitives from their own shadows? You step back into the chill of the November evening on the 3rd, the cottage door creaking shut behind you on its leather hinges, oiled quarterly with neat's foot fat rendered from the autumn slaughter, as the bleating from the pen escalates into a frantic chorus that sets Jess's ears pricking, her low growl rumbling like distant thunder. The wind, a steady wester from the Welsh marches, tugs at the tails of your smock, coarse linen stiffened with fuller's earth to repel the dampy, and carries the sharp, ammoniac scent of disturbed earth from the fold, where the hurdles shudder under the flock's press. You snatch up the lantern from its hook by the porch, its horn panes fogged with breath, the wick trimmed that morning to a even 1/4 inch for economy's sake, and hurry the few dozen yards to the pen, the beam cutting a yellow swath through the gathering dark. The sheep are in full tumult, not the orderly milling of a fox scare, but a blind surge, ewes trampling lambs in their haste, wool catching on the chestnut stakes until tufts snag and tear free like surrendered flags. Jess darts in, nipping heels to turn the outer ones, but even she falters, hackles raised as if scenting something beyond the visible, a vibration in the ground that you feel now through the soles of your hobnailed boots, a low thrumming like the loom's shuttle in the distant Banbury mills, persistent but sourceless. By the time you've wrestled the gate open with the iron latch, its bolt slick with dew, and coaxed the flock into the barn. A sturdy timber frame thatched with straw from the tithe barn at Enstone, its doors barred with oak beams hewn by your grandfather's adze. The commotion has roused the neighbors. Lanterns bob across the intervening field like will-o'-the-wisps, and old Tom Hargreaves from the next holding trudges over the stile, his gait slowed by the rheumatism that knots his knuckles from years dipping fleeces in the tar vats. He's a tenant like you, his fold of Cotswolds leased from the same squire under a 7-year agreement inked on stamped parchment, and his face, weathered like the limestone walls, creases with the same bafflement as you share a pipe under the barn eaves. His tobacco a dark shag from the village tobacconist, rolled tight in rice paper to last the bowl. Heard it from Charlbury way, he mutters, exhaling a plume that curls in the lantern light. Sheep boltin' like the devils at their tails. No cause nor cry. Reports trickle in over the next hour, passed like a relay of whispers. The vicar's glebe flock scattering into the spinney, hedges splintered where they'd charged. The home farm's south downs piling against the river fence at the even load, drowning in the shallows until the bailiff's lads hauled them out with ropes coiled from the harness shed. No lightning cracks the sky, no thunder rolls, just this inexplicable tide, cresting across the downs as if the earth itself exhaled a secret panic. Dawn on the 4th reveals the extent, the sun rising pallid through a veil of mist that clings to the valleys like the steam from a washhouse copper. You survey the damage by first light, the lantern set aside for the day's natural glow, tallying the losses with a tally stick notched by your knife, its blade ground weakly on the oil stone kept in the crook's pouch. 3 lambs trampled, their small forms stiff and muddied. A dozen ewes gashed on the hurdle's splinters, needing salves of Stockholm tar mixed with lard from the dairy churn, applied with a hog's hair brush to staunch the bleeding. Breakfast is hurried, the porridge reheated over the embers with a poker thrust into the pot, its crust skimmed off to feed the chickens that peck in the yard, their combs bright against the frost-rimed earth. The children are roused early, sent to the village school in Grade 2 with their slates wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, their walk shortened by the pony cart if the lanes are too churned. But today you keep the youngest home to help gather the strays, his small hands clutching a hazel switch to urge the laggards, learning the crook's language before his voice has fully settled. Word spreads through the parish with the morning's routines, carried on the feet of the farmhands trudging to their labors. The blacksmith at the crossroads forge, his anvil ringing with the shoeing of plow horses, pausing to share tales over his bellows breath. The women at the communal well, drawing water into yoked buckets of galvanized iron, their gossip laced with the creak of the windlass as they speculate on earth tremors from the Welsh mines or gas vents from the old Roman barrows. The squire, Sir Reginald from the hall, dispatches his gamekeeper on a bay gelding, its flanks lathered from the canter, to convene the tenants in the tithe barn, a vast reed-thatched expanse where the grain tithes are threshed with flails of seasoned hazel, the chaff swept into winnowing baskets for the poultry litter. There, amid the dusty rafters hung with drying herbs from the still room, lavender and wormwood to moth-proof the wool sacks, you gather with 24 others, the air thick with the scent of linseed oil from the leather harnesses stacked in the corner. Discussions turn practical. Fences reinforced with extra paling driven by post-hole diggers rented from the ironmonger in Chipping Norton. Their points sharpened on the grindstone. Watches doubled at night, with lanterns fueled by tallow dips molded from the autumn rendering, their wicks braided to burn steady without guttering. Supper that evening stretches the larder. A hash of mutton neck bones simmered with onions from the root cellar, its gravy thickened with barley from the last sheaf, eaten from willow-patterned plates chipped at the edges. The family gathered close around the table to parse the day's dispatches. Letters from kin in Gloucestershire, where similar surges have splintered the Cotswold stone walls. Sheep found wedged in the gaps like driftwood after a flood. By week's end, the panic's scope clarifies, etched into the county's ledgers like entries in the enclosure maps surveyed by the perambulators a century prior. Reports from the Oxford Journal, fetched by the carrier's cart that rumbles the lanes with its load of coals in hempen sacks, detail the wave. On the 3rd, flocks from Burford to Bampton bolting en masse, charging fences at speeds that splinter oak posts seasoned for a decade, their wool matted with blood from self-inflicted gashes. The veterinary surgeon from Oxford, Mr. Hargrove, arrives in his gig drawn by a dapple grey, his black bag stocked with lancets and blistering irons, but finds no fever or trembles, only the residual quivers in the survivors, treated with drenches of aloes and gentian root mixed in the mixing trough, administered via horn dosers to purge imagined toxins. Survival pivots on these contingencies, communal folds established in the ancient strip fields, their boundaries marked by furze faggots bound with bramble, allowing shepherds to pool their crooks and dogs for mutual watch. The women's sewing circles repurposed to mend the torn fleeces, needles of bone plying worsted thread to stitch wounds closed before the blowflies lay. Personal vignettes emerge in the hearthside hours. Your neighbor's tale of his grandfather's day, when the 1840s cattle plague had culled the herds. Families subsisting on nettle soup, gathered in gloves of boiled leather, turning want into woven baskets sold at the Michaelmas Fair. As November deepens, with the first snow dusting the wolds like flour sifted from a bolting cloth, the surges recur in fits, flocks scattering at odd hours, the ground humming faintly underfoot, chalk dust rising in puffs from the burrows disturbed. The squire petitions the Board of Agriculture in London, his letter franked on vellum and dispatched by the mail coach that changes horses at the Red Lion Inn, its horn blaring through the fog. Yet explanations elude. No quakes registered on the seismographs newly installed at Kew. No gas leaks from the collieries in the north. In the cottage's hush, as you mend the crook's ferrule with a file rasped smooth, the wind carrying distant bleats like unanswered calls, one contemplates. As the downs tremble with this phantom force, what buried resonance might yet summon the flock to ruin before the winter's frost binds the earth still? You hunker in the cottage doorway as December's first heavy frosts etch filigree across the window panes. The glass panes salvaged from the old squire's greenhouse and fitted with putty knifed smooth, their frames swollen against the cold that seeps through every chink like an uninvited guest. The wind has stilled to a murmur, carrying no more than the occasional muffled bleat from the barn, where the flock huddles in the lee of hayricks stacked with pitchforks and bound with tarred twine to shed the damp. The surges have peaked in the fortnight since that November night, cresting like a tide against the county's ancient folds. On the 10th, 1,000 head from the Charlbury estates bolting westward toward the even-load, swollen banks, their woolen mass splintering the withy fences woven from osier rods, harvested in the osier beds along the river, bodies piling in drifts until the morning's light revealed the toll. Hundreds drowned or trampled, their forms dragged from the mud with grapnels and carted to the lime pits for burial. The air sharp with the scent of quicklime slaked in the quenching troughs. You remember the grim labor of those days, joining the communal work parties under the squire's bailiff, his ledger tallying the losses in copperplate script on foolscap sheets. Each entry a deduction from the spring's wool clip that would tighten the family's belt another notch. The climax unfolds in the unyielding grip of that mid-December chill, when the ground hardens to iron underfoot, the chalk downs cracking like old porcelain where the sheep's hooves had gouged divots in the softer months. The veterinary surgeons, now numbering 3 from Oxford and Banbury, convene in the tithe barn's loft, their black bags arrayed on the trestle tables like instruments in a still room. Stethoscopes of vulcanite tubing, phlegms for bleeding the veins, and jars of Fowler's solution, arsenic tincture in measured drachms to calm the nerves they suspect overstimulated by some unseen miasma. Mr. Hargrove, the senior among them, pores over barometer readings logged in his pocketbook, its pages gummed with the damp, the needle's fluctuations charted hourly since the first rumble, while the others dissect a fallen ewe on a plank table scrubbed with soda crystals, their scalpels parting the wool to reveal no parasites or abscesses. Only a faint congestion in the lungs, perhaps from the dust raised in the charges. Remedies are dispensed with the precision of apothecaries, drenches of bromide salts dissolved in the mixing vat, funneled down throats with canvas muzzles to prevent choking, or blistering pastes of Spanish fly rubbed into the fetlocks, the vesicants drawing serum to draw out the phantom vapors. You administer one such to your own flock, the paste mixed in a horn cup from the harness room's stores, its acrid sting masked by the lanolin's balm. The ewes subdued as if the frost itself weighed their limbs. Resolution settles gradually, like snow accumulating on the hedgerows, the surges tapering by the solstice as the earth quiets under winter's pall. The final wave on the 18th scatters only 100 head from the outlying pastures, their flight checked by the deepened ditches dug with navvy spades borrowed from the railway works at Kingham, their banks revetted with turves cut from the commons and sodded firm. By Christmas, the downs lie hushed, the flock folded in the barn's pens of sawn deal partitions, their breath steaming in the confined air warmed by the heat of their bodies and the braziers of glowing peat from the moorlands, tended hourly to prevent the chill that could founder a ewe. Survival in this aftermath hinges on the season's quiet economies. The hay rationed from the lofts, each truss forked down and shaken loose to remove the dust that settles like fine chalk, fed in mangers hollowed from halved logs to minimize waste. the supplementary mash of bran and chopped turnips from the clamp pit, where the roots are stored under straw caps to ferment slowly against the frost. Personal stories buoy these efforts. Tom's wife, her hands raw from carding the salvageable fleeces on the great wheel in the parlor, spins the wool into yarn dyed with madder from the kitchen garden. The skeins bartered at the village market for a side of bacon from the pork butcher's smokehouse, its hams cured in brine from the salt pans at Droitwich. Your own children contribute. The eldest scraping the mangers clean with a worn scraper forged from an old scythe blade, learning the value of every morsel in the lean ledger of the farm. The outcomes, tallied in the new year as the frost thaws to mud in the lanes, paint a picture of muted endurance rather than triumph. The county's losses mount to over 400 sheep. Per the journal's final count, a dent in the wool tithes that prompts the squire to petition for relief from the Board of Agriculture. His correspondence bundled in oilskin against the post rider's wet saddlebags, yielding a grant of seed oats for the spring sowing to offset the fodder depleted in the folds. The veterinary reports, bound in Morocco leather and filed in the Oxfordshire Hall's archives, conclude with vague allusions to infrasonic disturbances, waves of low-frequency sound too deep for human ears, but resonant in the flock's sensitive sinuses, perhaps from a distant quarry blast in the Mendips, or the Earth's own subterranean sighs, though no seismograph at Kew registers the quake. Fences are rebuilt sturdier, with mortised oak posts sunk 2 feet deep and wired with galvanized strands from the ironmonger's rolls. Their barbs hammered from scrap horseshoes, watches persist into lambing, the crook's staffs reinforced with iron ferrules to prod the restless. The wool trade adapts too. The Banbury clippers, their shears oiled with neat's foot against the grit, process the survivors' fleeces at a premium. The yarn fetching an extra penny per hank at the Whitney mills, where the looms clack through the nights to meet the colonial orders for army blankets. In the hearth's glow of early 1884, as you portion the Yule log's embers into the ash pit for lye soap comes spring, its fat boiled with wood ash in the copper under the lean-to, the episode fades into the fabric of local lore, a cautionary thread in the shepherd's tales swapped over mugs of elderberry cordial at the ploughman's arms, its pewter tankards scoured with sand from the riverbed. This peculiar panic, a mere footnote in the annals of Victorian agriculture overshadowed by the Irish famines and the transatlantic cattle plagues, illuminates the fragility of the ordinary. How the land's hidden pulses can upend the careful husbandry of generations, turning guardians of the fold into witnesses to caprice. It speaks to resilience not in grand gestures, but in the mended hurdle, the ration truss, the shared drench that steadies the herd through the unseen storm. Today, as mechanized flocks graze under drone watches and global markets fluctuate like barometer needles, one pauses to consider. If a whisper from the earth could scatter Oxfordshire's sheep in 1883, what latent tremors in our own engineered pastures might yet call the quiet rhythms to account? Reminding us that beneath the wool lies a world ever prone to its own inscrutable dance. You settle into the front porch of a modest frame house on Champaign Avenue in Mattoon, Illinois, as the sun dips low on the evening of August 31st, 1944, casting long shadows across the neatly mowed lawn where crabgrass edges the flower beds of petunias and marigolds. Their blooms a splash of color against the utilitarian rows of victory gardens that stretch to the alley. Mattoon, this unassuming rail hub in the heart of Coles County, is no booming Chicago with its skyscrapers and stockyards, but a town of 12,000 souls woven from the warp of cornfields and coal mines, its streets lined with bungalows of clapboard siding painted in practical whites and grays, their gables trimmed with gingerbread scrollwork faded from the prairie winds that sweep in from the west. The air carries the faint, sweet tang of ripening corn from the surrounding flatlands, those endless checkerboards of tassels and silks that feed the grain elevators along the New York Central tracks, where freight cars rumble through twice daily, laden with beans and oats bound for the war effort overseas. Life here, in the midst of America's industrial heartland during the fourth year of the Second World War, unfolds in these incremental assurances. The evening paper fetched from the newsboy on his Schwinn bicycle, its tires rationed to retreads of synthetic rubber, folded under your arm as you sip coffee from a tin mug, the brew stretched with chicory from the A&P grocer to make the victory roast last. Your home, a two-story affair built in the 1920s boom when the oil wells briefly dotted the outskirts, hums with the quiet efficiencies of wartime thrift. Inside, the kitchen table, oak scarred from years of knife work on Sunday roasts, is spread with the evening's meal. Creamed tuna on toast points, the fish from a can stamped with the blue eagle of the NRA, its flaky white mixed with a white sauce of powdered milk, reconstituted in the enameled saucepan. The bread sliced thin from the loaf baked at home with yeast cakes bought on points from the ration book. Portions are doled with care. Your husband, perhaps a machinist at the Indiana Glass Company plant on the edge of town, where he turns out thermos bottles for the troops, tallies the stamps in the little red booklet. 8 for sugar this month. Enough for a single cake if the flour holds. The children, 2 boys nearing draft age and a daughter in her teens helping at the switchboard downtown, eat in shifts around the console radio. Its bakelite cabinet dusted weekly with a lamb's wool duster to keep the static low, tuned to WLS for the news from Europe. The Allies pushing through Normandy, the ration on gasoline holding at 3 gallons a week for essential drives only. Mattoon's days are stitched from these routines, a tapestry of ordinary endurance amid the global fray. Dawn breaks with the factory whistle from the Mattoon Manufacturing Company, where women like your neighbor, Mrs. Harlan, sew parachutes from bolts of ripstop nylon, their fingers pricked by the treadle machines that hum through the 12-hour shifts, the fabric's sheen catching the light from bare bulbs strung on extension cords. You might join them if your hands are free from the canning, jars of peaches from the backyard tree, processed in the pressure cooker with rings tightened just so to seal against spoilage, their labels penned in India ink with the date and yield, stacked in the fruit cellar under the stairs where the concrete walls weep condensation in the humid August air. Lunch is carried in a lard pail, a sandwich of Spam on Wonder Bread, the pink slices cured with nitrates that leave a faint metallic aftertaste, wrapped in wax paper stamped from the ration board's surplus, eaten on a bench by the rail yard where switchmen in striped overalls signal with lanterns. their calls lost in the hiss of escaping steam from the locomotives idling on sidetracks. The town's pulse quickens slightly at the USO Canteen on Broadway, a converted storefront with gingham curtains sewn by the Ladies' Aid Society, where servicemen on leave from Chanute Field, the airbase 5 miles north, its runways buzzing with B-29 trainers, sip coffee laced with postum, and dance to Glenn Miller on the Victrola, the record scratched from frequent play, but cherished for the swing that lifts the evening's weight. Mattoon, named for the Mattoon family who platted it in 1855 amid the Illinois Central's expansion, thrives on this rail nexus. Coal from the Briar Hill mine tipped into hopper cars, their loads destined for the steel mills in Gary, or the daily milk train from the dairy farms, cans sloshing with the morning's yield, pasteurized in the co-op's vats before bottling in glass returnables that clink in the delivery wagons. Community binds it all. The block wardens patrolling after dark with flashlights dimmed by blue cellophane to comply with blackout drills. Their notebooks logging the shaded windows where families gather around oil lamps when the power flickers from overload at the generating station. Yet beneath this steadied surface, the war's tendrils weave subtle strains. Ration books dictate the wardrobe, dresses remade from feed sacks printed with floral patterns from the co-op, hems let out for growing frames, tires on the Ford coupe balled to the cords, driven only to the Victory Garden plots on the old fairgrounds, where you hoe the rows of carrots and cabbages under the watchful eye of the agricultural extension agent, his ledger tracking yields against the government's quotas. Personal stories thread these days. Your husband's brother, shipped out to the Pacific 6 months prior, his letters censored but vivid in the spaces between. Descriptions of Spam fritters in the mess tent, the salt air of Guadalcanal clinging to his fatigues like a second skin. The daughter at the switchboard fields calls from the base, her switchboard cords plugged with practiced flicks, voices crackling with orders for parts or pleas for leave, the lines humming with the static of distance. Evenings bring the ritual of the scrap drive, the children scouring the attic for rubber hoses and tinfoil from cigarette packs, bundled into burlap sacks hauled to the collection point at the high school gymnasium, its floor waxed for the Friday sock hops now subdued by the war's somber note. September 1st dawns muggy, the air thick with the hum of cicadas in the elms lining the residential streets, their shade dappled on the sidewalks cracked from the winter heaves. Your routine holds. Breakfast of oatmeal simmered with raisins hoarded from the last relief shipment, portioned into bowls with spoons bent from overuse. The walk to the A&P for the week's stamps, the shelves sparse but orderly. Canned goods rotated by the grocer's wire basket to keep the oldest stock forward. By evening, as you draw the blackout curtains, blackout cloth tacked with brass tacks hammered flush, you settle the family for the radio serial, the Atwater Kent's dial glowing faintly as The Shadow crackles to life. But on this night, in a house much like yours on the east side, something shifts. Aline Kearney, a war worker at the glass factory, tucks her 3-year-old daughter into the iron bedstead with its chenille spread, the room's air stirred by the ceiling fan whirring on a pulley cord. She steps to the kitchen for a glass of well water drawn that afternoon, its tin dipper cool against her palm, when a sweetish odor wafts through the screen door, paralyzing gas, she later tells the Journal Gazette, her legs buckling as if unstrung, a burning sensation creeping up her throat like the sting of lye soap mishandled. The report makes the local paper the next day, a brief item amid the war dispatches. A prowler with a gas-spraying device fled before police arrival. The sheriff's deputy noting the faint marks on the porch rail where gloved hands might have gripped. You read it over coffee, the newsprint inky on your fingers, dismissing it at first as a prankster's mischief. Boys from the high school with siphoned ether from the chem lab, perhaps. Or a vagrant spooked by the blackout patrols. But as the sun climbs, whispers circulate at the canteen. Similar smells reported on Lincoln Avenue. A neighbor's dog retching in the yard, its paws scrabbled against the chain-link fence. In the hush of that ordinary afternoon, with the trolley clanging down Broadway to the depot and the ice wagon's bells tinkling for the house calls, one lingers on the threshold. What faint intrusion into the night's routine might unravel the town's quiet vigil, turning the familiar streets into avenues of unseen threat? You linger over the morning's Journal Gazette on September 2nd, the newsprint's ink still tacky from the press run at the corner bindery, where linotype machines clatter through the night setting type from molten lead, its faint metallic scent mingling with the coffee percolating on the gas ring in your kitchen. The article on Aline Kearney's ordeal occupies a modest column amid the fuller spreads on the war. Dispatches from the Pacific Theater, where MacArthur's forces island-hop toward Leyte, and the home front tallies of war bond drives. Mattoon's quota met last week with a rally at the high school auditorium, its stage draped in bunting sewn from surplus parachute silk. Kearney's account, penned by the deputy sheriff's notepad transcription, describes the intruder as a tall figure in dark clothes, glimpsed through the lace curtains of her bedroom window, a spray of paralyzing vapor wafting from a device like a flower sprayer, leaving her limbs numb and her throat raw as if gargled with undiluted lye. You fold the paper neatly, aligning the creases for the kindling bundle come evening, and head to the Indiana glass plant, your lunch pail swinging from a bale of baling wire. A deviled ham sandwich on graham crackers, the spread thinned with pickle relish from the root cellar crocks, where the jars sit in neat rows labeled with gummed paper tags, their contents rotated monthly to prevent the soft rot that creeps in from the earthen floor's damp. The day's labor at the plant proceeds with the measured cadence of wartime production. Conveyor belts humming under fluorescent tubes that flicker from the voltage dips at the Coles County Power Station, where coal-fired boilers strain against the surge from the arc welders in the adjacent foundry. You pack the thermos bottles, quarts of seamless steel, their stoppers of bakelite threaded tight against leaks, into wooden crates nailed from scrap lumber salvaged from the packing sheds, each crate stenciled with Ordnance Department specs in black enamel paint. The brushes cleaned in turpentine kept in 5-gallon tins under the benches. Lunch break brings the women together in the canteen annex, a Quonset hut of corrugated iron bolted to the main building, its tables formica-topped and scarred from cigarette burns, where you share cornbread muffins baked in the communal oven with lard rationed from the hog drives at the county fairgrounds, now repurposed for truck assembly. Conversation turns to the gasser over the steam from the communal teapot. loose-leaf orange peco steeped in a granite-ware pot, its strainer of perforated tin catching the dregs. Speculation laced with the practical. Mrs. Harlan suggests the odor might stem from the carbon tetrachloride used in the fire extinguishers hung along the shop walls, its volatile fumes escaping a faulty valve. Another recalls the 1938 scare in nearby Charleston, when factory leaks from the dye vats sickened a dozen, treated with milk toasts and bicarbonate dosed from the plant nurse's cabinet. By evening, the reports multiply, threading through the town's routines like a loose stitch in the blackout fabric. On September 4th, as you return from the evening shift, the trolley car rattling along the cinder ballast with its bell clanging at the crossings, its seats upholstered in worn mohair that sheds lint onto your overalls. The streets buzz with hushed exchanges at the corner drugstore, where the soda fountain dispenses phosphates of vanilla syrup over chipped ice from the block truck, the carbonator hissing under the counter. A neighbor on Briar Street, Mrs. Florence Rucker, recounts her brush the night prior, awakened by a Swedish paralysis creeping from the back porch, her husband rousing to chase a shadowy form into the alley. Flashlight beam catching only the glint of spectacles on a fleeing figure. The yard marked by a peculiar three-toed print in the soft earth by the coal chute, where the bin's hinged lid creaks open weakly for the delivery boys shovel loads of anthracite from the Briar Hill tipple. The sheriff's office, a squat brick edifice on the square with its brass spittoons polished daily by the janitor's rag, fields a dozen calls by dusk. Deputies in Stetson hats and wool serge trousers, their revolvers holstered in cross-draw rigs, patrol the residential blocks in the black and white Ford, its engine tuned with points filed from the auto supply's stock, sirens tested weekly to comply with the civil defense drills. No arrests yet, but the town council convenes in the city hall basement, its oaken table scarred from the war bond auctions, drafting ordinances for neighborhood watches, block captains armed with police whistles forged from the local foundry's brass. Their blasts to summon the patrols without wasting the precious flashlight batteries rationed at 2 per household. Survival in these lengthening nights leans on these adaptations, the ordinary amplified by vigilance. Blackout curtains are doubled, inner layers of cheesecloth tacked over the muslin to diffuse the glow from the Aladdin mantel lamps, fueled by denatured alcohol from the hardware store's drums. Doors bolted with Yale locks oiled quarterly to prevent the squeak that might betray a household. Meals stretch further against the unease. Supper a casserole of elbow macaroni from the relief crates, baked with canned corned beef hash and topped with crushed saltines for crust. The oven's pilot light banked low to conserve the natural gas piped from the panhandle fields. Personal stories circulate at the PTA meetings in the school basement, its potbelly stove stoked with corn cobs from the silo sweeps. One father's account of his night watch, perched on the garage roof with a slingshot loaded with nuts from the hickory tree, its branches pruned annually to clear the power lines. A mother's remedy for the jitters. Chamomile tea steeped from the herb bundles dried in the attic rafters. Its infusion sipped from jelly jars to steady the hands for the victory knitting circles, where needles click through khaki wool for socks destined for the quartermaster depots. September 8th, brings a surge. The Journal Gazette's headline in bold type set on the linotype's slugs, "Mad Anesthetist Stalks City," the moniker coined by the wire services echoing the pulp serials on the newsstands, their covers lurid under the spinner racks. Reports tally 20-odd victims by then, from the East Side's bungalows to the worker houses near the tracks. A family on Logan Street roused by the hiss of gas under the kitchen window. The father lunging out with a broom handle only to collapse in spasms, revived with smelling salts from the medicine chest, stocked with aspirin tablets counted like ration stamps. A widow on Richmond Avenue finding her pet canary dead in its gilded cage. The bird's yellow plumage stark against the droppings, its seed dish untouched since the morning's fill from the bulk bin at the feed store. The state police join the fray, their Plymouth sedans arriving from Springfield with red bubble lights wired to the dashboards, forensic kits unpacked in the sheriff's garage, fingerprint powders dusted on porch rails with camel hair brushes, the latent prints lifted on gelatin sheets, developed in the dark room improvised from a closet with a red safe light bulb. Yet clues dissolve like mist. The footprints, cast in plaster of Paris mixed in the patrol car's trunk, reveal no tread marks from local shoemakers. The gas samples, trapped in glass ampules sealed with wax from the evidence locker, analyzed at the university lab in Urbana, yield only traces of sulfur dioxide from the coal smoke that veils the town at dawn. Community strains show in the small fissures. The grocer's shelves cleared of baking soda for antacid remedies, its boxes rationed to one per family to counter the burning throats. The telephone lines overloaded at the switchboard, your daughter's plugs clicking furiously to route the frantic calls, her break taken with a cracker from the vending machine stocked with Hershey bars at 5 cents apiece. Resilience threads through it. The block parties repurposed for patrols, lanterns fueled with kerosene strained through cheesecloth to remove the sediment, shared around the communal fire pit dug in the churchyard. The women's auxiliary baking extra loaves from the wheat flour allotment, distributed door to door in baskets lined with newsprint, a crust of solidarity against the night's chill. As the moon wanes toward the equinox, with the cornstalks rustling in the fields like whispered warnings and the trolley's last run echoing down the empty streets, the patrols thicken, their footsteps measured on the gravel paths. In this vigil of drawn shades and doled breaths, one ponders. As the gasser's shadow elongates across the porches, what overlooked fracture in the town's wartime weave might yet summon the phantom to its final fleeting form? You rise with the first gray light on September 12th, 1944, the alarm clock's brass bell tinkling softly under the pillow to spare the children's sleep, its face wound nightly with the key kept in the dresser drawer amid the ration books and the faded snapshot of your husband in his service uniform, khaki wool pressed with a flat iron heated on the stoveplate. The air in the bedroom hangs heavy with the night's closeness, the lace curtains undisturbed since dusk, their hems weighted with washers from the mending basket to hang straight against the sill. Downstairs, you kindle the kitchen range with twists of newspaper from the stack by the back door. Yesterday's Journal Gazette, its headlines on the gasser's latest haunt now crumpled for the firebox, adding split hickory from the woodshed. its bark peeled back in curls to expose the pale heartwood, the flames licking up to warm the percolator where the last of the coffee grounds steep in the basket, yielding a brew as thin as the war's promises, but sipped black from the chipped Fire King mug, its handle reglued with Duco cement from the hardware store's tube. Breakfast unfolds in portions. Cornflakes from the rationed box, portioned dry into bowls with evaporated milk measured by the tablespoon to stretch the can. The flakes softened by the night's humidity in the bread box lined with wax paper. The climax of the Gasser's reign crests in those mid-September days, a crescendo of reports that swells the sheriff's log like ink-blotting foolscap. Over 40 incidents by the 15th, the Phantom's visits threading from the east side bungalows to the frame houses near the rail yards, where the night express whistles through at 2 a.m., its headlamp sweeping the switch points like a searchlight. On the 10th, the Stress family on DeWitt Avenue awakens to the hiss under the kitchen eave. The father, a riveter at the glass plant, stumbling out with a coal shovel from the bin, its blade nicked from years of ash tossing, only to find the yard empty but for a woman's silk stocking snagged on the fence pickets, its lace garter elastic stretched and frayed, later analyzed at the State Crime Lab in Springfield as ordinary hosiery from the Sears catalog, nylon rationed to 1 pair per quarter. The paralysis grips tighter in the tales. A widow on Marshall Avenue, her limbs leaden for hours, dosed with bicarbonate stirred into well water from the oaken bucket, the fizz settling her stomach like the calm after a blackout drill. A night watchman at the co-op grain elevator, his throat burning as if swabbed with mercurochrome from the first aid kit, revived with lozenges of menthol cough drops unwrapped from their foil sleeves, the paper folded neat for the scrap drive. The state police, their Plymouths now a convoy on the national road, set ambushes in the cornfields abutting the residential fringes, stalks shoulder high, their tassels shedding pollen like dust from an attic trunk. Deputies hunkered in the furrows with shotguns oiled against the dew, their breeches of wool gabardine chafing at the knees from the vigil. Resolution emerges not in a captured villain, but in the gradual unraveling of the weave. The incidents tapering by the 20th as abruptly as they flared, like a fuse burned to its end. The final flurry on the 18th scatters to the west side. A report from the trailer court near the base, where war workers in prefab homes of masonite panels bolted to concrete runners wake to the odor. The sheriff's floodlights, mounted on the Ford's roof with clamps from the auto shop, sweeping the gravel lots empty, yielding only a discarded flashlight with a bulb of frosted glass, its lens cracked, but tracing no fingerprints under the iodine fuming in the evidence tent pitched from Army surplus canvas. Investigations pivot inward. The coroner's inquest in the courthouse basement, its walls paneled in quarter-sawn oak from the local mill, reviews the medical logs from Dr. Hyde's clinic, a frame building on the square with its waiting room benches worn smooth from the cough syrup lines, revealing no toxins in the blood samples drawn with glass syringes sterilized in the autoclave, only elevated adrenaline from the fright, treated with phenobarbital tablets counted from the amber bottles like ration chits. The Journal-Gazette, its presses inked anew for the all-clear editorial on the 22nd, attributes it to mass hysteria, the wire services echoing the diagnosis from the American Psychological Association's bulletin. Collective anxiety amplified by the war's shadows, where rationed nerves fray like the hems of remade dresses, symptoms self-suggested through the neighborhood whispers and the radio's crime dramas crackling from the Philco consoles. Outcomes settle into the town's fabric with the equinox's turn. The corn harvest commencing under the combine's rumble, their blades dulled weakly on the whetstone in the machine shed, the ears husked into burlap sacks sewn shut with twine from the ball in the rafter hooks. The sheriff's patrols thinned to routine. The Ford's engines idled on blocks in the garage to conserve the gasoline coupons punched for essential miles. The block watches dissolve into the autumn leaf rakes, their piles mulched into the victory gardens for winter cover. The compost turned with garden forks forged from the scrap iron drives. No arrests, no gasser unmasked. The stocking and flashlight consigned to the evidence locker, a steel cabinet bolted to the floor amid the yellowed warrants, and the Colt revolvers oiled monthly with Hops No. 9 from the armorer's kit. Mattoon exhales. The USO dances resume with fuller floors. The jukebox stocked with dimes saved from the vending machines, tunes of boogie-woogie bugle boy lifting the feet once more. The canning jars seal their last batches of green beans blanched in the copper boiler. Their lids ping tight with the sealing tool's clamp, stacked for the winter larder that'll bridge to VE Day's hoped-for bounty. Resilience here gleams in the unremarked men's. The auxiliaries' quilt bees piece and blocks from the feed sack's remnants into bed covers for the Red Cross shipments, their stitches even under the thimble's press. The grocer's ledger balancing the baking soda restock with the autumn apples from the orchards, traded pound for pound in the ledger's columns. Personal echoes linger in the hearthside hours. Mrs. Rucker, her throat soothed by the lozenges that become a neighborhood staple, shares her remedy at the church supper. Elbow macaroni salad with Miracle Whip from the relief crates, portioned onto the paper plates folded from newsprint. Turning fright into fellowship. This peculiar interlude, a blip in the war's vast ledger overshadowed by D-Day and the Bulge, underscores the home front's quiet fractures. How the rationed pulse of daily life, stretched thin by stamps and scrimps, could conjure phantoms from the collective breath. A hysteria born not of malice but of the unseen tolls. The letters withheld, the suns shipped out, the nights lit only by the dimmed mantles. In our wired age of alerts and algorithms, where shadows flicker on screens rather than porches, one reflects. If Mattoon's gasser dissolved into the mind's mist in 1944, what spectral strains from our own veiled anxieties might yet seep through the cracks, reminding us that the surest vigilance lies not in the locked Yale, but in the shared mug of stretched coffee that steadies the hand against the dawn. You find yourself kneeling on the cold flagstone floor of the refectory in the convent of St. Mary's in Lower Saxony, Germany, as the vesper bells toll their measured peals from the chapel tower on a chill autumn afternoon in 1491. The air hangs heavy with the scent of beeswax from the tapers flickering on the high altar, their flames steady despite the drafts that slip through the narrow lancet windows high in the stone walls, glazed with thin horn panes that distort the gray sky beyond. St. Mary's, a modest Benedictine house founded in the 12th century amid the peat bogs and oak groves of the North German plain, is no grand abbey like Cluny with its vaulted halls and scriptoria buzzing with illuminators. It is a place of quiet enclosure. Its quadrangle of lime-washed cells and cloisters built from local fieldstone quarried by serfs who toiled under the abbess's charter, the mortar mixed with sand sifted from the nearby Elbe River's gravel beds. Here, in this ordered world of woolen habits and whispered offices, you are Sister Anna, a novice of 19 summers, your days woven from the warp of obedience and the weft of routine, far from the muddy lanes of your birthplace village where the thatch roofs sagged under perpetual rain. The convent's life unfolds in these unyielding patterns, a tapestry of small devotions that bind the 30 sisters, mostly daughters of minor knights or burghers, pledged to the veil by familial decree rather than divine call, through the lengthening shadows of the late Middle Ages. Dawn breaks with the prime bells summoning you from the dormitory, a long dormitory of whitewashed walls and truckle beds aligned in rows, their straw pallets shaken daily with besoms of birch twigs to disperse the mites that thrive in the damp woolen blankets dyed with woad from the convent's herb garden. You rise in the half-light, folding your scapular with care, the coarse, undyed wool scratchy against skin chafed from the nightly flagellation with a discipline of knotted cords, its thongs frayed from use, and join the procession to the lavabo, a stone basin fed by a lead pipe from the rain cisterns roofed with slates from the Rhenish quarries, where you rinse your hands in water scented faintly with lavender from the prior's stores. The soap, a rare luxury of tallow and ash, lie bartered from the village tanners. Breakfast follows in silence, the rule of Saint Benedict observed to the letter. A pottage of barley and leeks simmered overnight in the hearth cauldron, its iron swung on a chain from the lug pole, portioned with wooden ladles into horn bowls that echo softly as they pass hand to hand. The meal broken only by the reader's voice droning from the lectern, a passage from the rule intoned in measured Latin that washes over you like the convent's perpetual mist. Labor fills the hours that follow, those tedious threads that history often overlooks in favor of kings and crusades. As a novice, your tasks turn to the scriptorium in the mornings, where you grind pigments on a slate slab with a muller of lignum vitae wood. The lapis lazuli imported at great cost from Venice ground to a vivid blue for the missals illuminated by the more skilled sisters, their quills plucked from geese raised in the convent dovecote and sharpened with penknives forged in the abbey smithy. Afternoons bring the infirmary garden, where you weed the rows of feverfew and comfrey with a hooked dibber carved from yew, the herbs harvested with sickles honed on whetstones kept in the tool shed, their bundles hung to dry in the rafters of the still room, the air thick with the earthy tang of drying roots tied in bunches with hemp twine spun from the convent's flax plot. Meals are sparse and shared. The midday grace, a trencher of rye bread baked in the communal oven, its loaves pricked with a docker to prevent splitting. Sopped in a weak ale brewed from the abbey's barley kiln, dried over beechwood fires to impart a subtle smoke, the portions doled by the cellaress from the wooden measures calibrated against the abbess's yardstick. supper echoes it in modesty. A syllabub of ewe's milk curdled with rennet from the dairy goats, its whey saved for the scouring of the copper pots in the scullery, where pumice stones from the riverbed scrub the residue under the pump's spout. This cloistered existence, enforced by the enclosure edicts of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, is one of enforced solitude and communal vigilance, where the grille separates the sisters from the world beyond the enclosing walls. Those sturdy barriers of mortared stone, topped with bottle shards to deter climbers. Patrolled by the portress with her ring of iron keys jangling from a chatelaine belt, personal stories murmur through the recreation hour in the cloister garth, that enclosed garden of gravelled paths and raised beds of thyme and rosemary clipped with shears from the tool chest. Sister Gertrude, pledged at 12 after her father's ruin in the Hussite wars, whispers of her dreams of the village fairs with their gingerbread stalls and jugglers' bells. You share your own, the ache of leaving the hearth, where your mother stirred the pottage with a long-handled spoon worn smooth from generations. Her hands gnarled like the oak roots that tripped the path to the well. Survival here relies on these small resiliences, the mending circle after compline, where needles of fishbone ply linen thread to repair the frayed hems of habits, the patches cut from the discarded altar cloths, dyed with madder root from the apothecary's stores. The herbal possets brewed in the infirmary mortar, pestled with a pestle of olive wood imported via the Hanseatic traders, to soothe the colic that grips the young novices from the thin diet of pulse and peas pottage. Yet beneath this ordered veil, the 15th century presses with its unseen weights. The Black Death's echoes linger in the thinned ranks of the choir stalls, carved from local pine plane smooth by the convent carpenter, where empty places mark sisters lost to the buboes and fevers that swept the continent a half-century prior. Their graves dug in the orchard under quicklime to hasten decay. The 100 Years' War's tariffs choke the tithes, the alms chests in the porter's lodge meager with coppers from the wool merchants of Brunswick, their fleeces carded in the convent's attic loft with devil's combs of iron teeth. Schisms brew in the air like the incense from the thurible swung at high mass, the smoke of frankincense imported from the Levant curling around the rude screen painted with scenes of the Passion, its pigments flaking from the damp that seeps through the unpointed mortar. Into this cloister of quiet endurance steps the anomaly, subtle as a loose thread in the abbess's stole. It begins in the refectory after none on that October day. The sisters gathered for the silent collation, their horn spoons dipping into the communal bowl of cabbage pottage simmered with onions from the root cellar, the potage ladled from the cauldron with a long skimmer of perforated tin. Sister Elizabeth, a professed sister of 30 years, her habit's veil pinned with bone needles from the sewing chest, pauses mid-bite, her face contorting not in pain but in an odd compulsion, her teeth sinking suddenly into the arm of the novice beside her, Sister Clara, who cries out softly, the sound muffled by the rule's injunction against clamor. The bite draws blood, a thin rivulet staining the woolen sleeve, but Elizabeth withdraws with a shudder, her eyes distant as if pulled by an internal tide. The wound bound hastily with a strip of linen from the infirmary bandages, boiled in the copper kettle with soda ash to whiten. The abbess, Mother Hildegard, attributes it to a passing melancholy, prescribing a day's fast on bread and water drawn from the cistern chain, its bucket of oaken staves hooped with iron bands. But the incident lingers like the faint bruise on Clara's arm, a small rupture in the convent's seamless weave. As the Vespers proceed, the candles gutter in the draughts from the ill-fitted doors hung on iron pintles oiled with linseed from the stores, the chant of the Psalter rising in unison from the antiphonals bound in calfskin vellum, their pages ruled with dry point lines and illuminated initials in vermilion from the apothecary's pigments. You kneel in your stall, the prie-dieu's hassock of embroidered kneelers worked with cross-stitch wool from the spinning wheel's distaff, pondering the oddity amid the Latin's cadence. What solitary impulse in the cloister's hush might unravel into shared affliction, and how might its quiet bite echo through the stone halls before the abbess's rod restores the peace? You linger in the dim hush of the refectory after the vespers have faded, the flagstones still echoing faintly with the shuffle of sandaled feet retreating to the dormitory, their leather soles worn thin from the cloister paths graveled with crushed oyster shells from the Baltic trade, sifted annually to bind the mud that seeps from the boggy meadows beyond the walls. The wound on Sister Clara's arm, bound now with a linen strip from the infirmary's bolt, boiled in the copper cauldron with wood ash, lie to whiten and folded in precise quarters, throbs dully under her sleeve, a small puncture circled by the faint blue of bruising, like the ink spots from the scriptorium quills that bleed through vellum if overpressed. Mother Hildegard, her face framed by the wimple's stiff linen pleats, starched with bran water from the kitchen mash, dismisses the incident with a murmur of the rule's injunction against idle speech. Her crozier of ash wood, topped with an ivory corpus carved in the Cologne workshops, leaning against the lectern like a silent sentinel. But as you file out, the wooden clogs hollow on the stone. The air carries a subtle shift, a whisper exchanged in the cloister arcade, where the arches of rough-hewn sandstone drip with condensation from the slate roof gutters channeled to the rain barrels, their staves swollen to seal against leaks. The following days unfold with the convent's unyielding cadence, yet the anomaly threads deeper, like a snag in the woolen serge of your habit pulled loose during the linen folding in the lavabo. Prime summons you at matins chill, the bell's rope frayed from the sacristan's daily pulls, their clappers of bronze cast in the abbey foundry with molds of beeswax modeled from the prior's patterns. In the chapel, the antiphonals open to the Psalter's lamentations, their pages rustling as the cantor's voice rises in the nave's barrel vault, frescoed faintly with scenes of the desert fathers under lime wash that flakes in the winter damps, revealing the underdrawing in charcoal lines sketched with a silver point stylus. You kneel in your stall, the misericord's carved bracket, depicting a pelican in piety, its beak pricked to feed its young with blood, easing the strain on knees calloused from the oratory's prie-dieu. But your mind drifts to Elizabeth's face in the refectory light, her eyes glazed as if gazing inward to some shadowed chamber of the soul. By sext, the compulsion recurs, subtle as the first frost etching the leaded casements. In the herb garden, where you kneel to thin the rows of hyssop with a weeding hook of iron bent from the smith's anvil, its edge honed on the oil stone kept in the tool chest, padded with wool scraps. Sister Elizabeth approaches with a basket of harvested rue, its yellow blooms snipped at the stem to dry in the stillroom's lattice shelves. The air is sharp with the herb's bitter resin, mingled with the damp loam turned by the convent's spade, its blade stamped with the abbess's seal of a chalice and host. As she bends to offer a sprig for your posset mortar, pestled with a stone of serpentine from the river gravels, her hand falters, and she lunges, teeth sinking into your forearm through the woolen cuff, the bite swift and unyielding like the snap of a rat trap sprung in the granary. Pain flares, hot and immediate, but you withdraw with a gasp stifled by the vow of silence, the mark welling red against the skin salted from the morning's ablutions. Clara, nearby clipping sage with her pruning shears of sheared sheep bone hafted to a steel blade, rushes to bind it with a rag from the laundry basket, its linen hemmed with the convent's bone needle and threaded with flax spun on the great wheel in the undercroft. Word spreads through the recreation hour in the garth, that gravelled enclosure of boxwood hedges clipped with shears oiled against rust, where the sisters walk in pairs under the rule's measured paces, their rosaries of boxwood beads clicking softly like the convent's loom shuttles. Mother Hildegard convenes the chapter in the warming room, its hearth of river cobbles banked with peat turves cut from the abbey bog with a slain spade. The fire's glow casting shadows on the whitewashed walls hung with the prior's charts of the stars pricked on vellum for the nocturne hours. There, amid the murmur of woolen hems brushing the rush mats woven from the river reeds, she attributes the bites to demonic temptation, prescribing exorcism rites drawn from the Ritual Romanum, its pages bound in oak boards clasped with brass from the Hanseatic merchants. Holy water sprinkled from the aspergillum of yew twigs dipped in the stoup of lead-glazed earthenware, its contents blessed at the Easter Vigil with chrism oil compounded in the sacristy mortar. Remedies blend with the practical. Elizabeth confined to her cell for a novena of bread and water drawn from the pump's spout. The loaf baked in the refectory oven with a peel of seasoned ash, its crust pricked to vent the steam. And bleedings in the infirmary, where the fleam of lancet steel is heated red in the brazier of charcoal from the coppice woods, applied to the vein at the elbow to balance the humors thought overheated by melancholy bile. Context deepens in these enclosures, where the late 15th century presses with its monastic strains. The investiture controversy's scars linger in the bishop's visitations, his retinue arriving on palfreys shod at the village farrier with nails hammered from wrought iron, demanding audits of the tithe rolls inscribed on parchment rolls kept in the chapter chest, locked with a hasp of forged steel. Enclosure breeds isolation, the grille's iron bars forged in the abbey. Smithy twisted into foliate patterns, separating the sisters from the world where the Ottoman shadow lengthens over Constantinople's fall in 1453, its echoes reaching even this northern bog in the form of indulgences hawked by pardoners with their scrip of lead seals stamped with papal bulls. Personal afflictions compound. Sister Gertrude's letters from kin, smuggled via the laundress's basket of folded linens starched with potato water, speak of famine in the lowlands, where rye fields blacken with ergot from the damp harvests, its sclerotia ground into flour that sparks visions and convulsions in the village poor, treated with theriac pastilles of viper flesh and herbs from the apothecary's compendium. By Martinmas, the bites multiply, rippling through the offices like a contagion in the shared chalice. In the scriptorium, Clara seizes Gertrude's hand during the gilding of a capital letter with gold leaf burnished on agate slabs imported from the Rhineland cutters, her teeth clamping the wrist until the pricking awl drops, its point nicked from the vellum's resistance. The chapter prescribes penances, extra psalms chanted in the oratory's stalls of carved oak planed smooth by the convent joiner, their misericords flipped up for the long vigils, and flagellations in the undercroft, the disciplines of braided leather thongs laid across the shoulders under the supervision of the mistress of novices, her rod of hazel switch cut fresh from the orchard to ensure the sting without scarring. Resilience shows in these rituals, the mending of wounds with salves of yarrow poultice pounded in the mortar with honey from the apiary hives of straw skeps daubed with cow dung against the wind, applied under bindings of unbleached linen boiled in the scullery copper. The shared vigils where sisters rotate watches over the afflicted, their rosaries passed hand to hand like anchors in the night's swell. As Advent's fasts begin, with the refectory table bare save for the fish pottage of salted herring from the North Sea, barrels unhooped in the salting shed, the Mania threads wider, Elizabeth's cell a nexus from which the compulsion emanates, her bites now answered in kind by Clara, who nips at the cellarist during the wine rationing in the buttery, its casks of Rhenish vintage broached with augurs turned by the cooper's adze. The bishop's envoy arrives on All Saints' Eve, his mule stabled in the outer court with fodder of oat chaff from the granary bins, bearing relics wrapped in silk from the cathedral's treasury to ward the possession thought to lurk. In the chapter's hush, as the envoy's thurible swings its chains of chased silver, filling the air with myrrh gum from the Levant trade, one contemplates the deepening coil, as the bites bind the sisters in this shared affliction. What hidden fervor in the cloister's vow might yet summon the full unraveling before the bishop's cross restores the fractured peace? You stand in the shadowed undercroft of St. Mary's as Advent's chill seeps through the barrel-vaulted ceiling, the stones overhead arched from local limestone hewn by quarrymen whose picks rang in the abbey's ledgers a century prior, their mortar joints repointed every decade with lime slaked in the kiln's trough of clay-lined brick. The air down here is thick with the must of stored roots, turnips from the root cellar, their tops trimmed with sickles and layered in sand sifted from the riverbank to prevent sprouting, and the faint, acrid tang of the vinegar used to scour the oak barrels stacked against the walls. Their hoops tightened with mallets of lignum vitae wood imported via the Hanseatic cog ships that dock at Hamburg with their holds groaning under Baltic timber. It is mid-December now. The Mania's grip tightening like the frost that rims the lavabo basin each dawn, its lead spout dripping condensation into the stone trough where you rinse the breakfast trenchers of horn and pewter. The water warmed over the scullery brazier, fueled by charcoal from the coppice coppiced on the 3-year cycle prescribed by the steward's tally sticks, notched for each felled ash. The climax swells in these confined depths, where the bites cascade through the offices like a contagion in the shared ewer, claiming half the sisters by the octave of Christmas. In the oratory during lauds, as the antiphonals open to the Magnificat, with pages creased from the cantor's thumb, Sister Gertrude lunges at the sub-prioress during the genuflection, her teeth clamping the hand that holds the thuribal's chain, forged links of wrought iron chased with silver from the abbess's alms chest, drawing blood that spatters the altar frontal embroidered with silk floss from the convent's loom, its pattern of the Annunciation frayed at the edges from the laundress's lye washes. The chapel erupts in muffled cries, the rule's silence shattered like a dropped pax board of olive wood inlaid with ivory. The sisters recoiling in their stalls as Mother Hildegard rings the Sanctus bell with a clapper of deer antler, its peal summoning the portress from her lodge with the heavy oak door barred by an iron drawbar slid into sockets mortised by the joiner's chisel. Gertrude is restrained with cords of hemp rope from the tool shed, knotted in reef hitches learned from the fisherman's widow who serves as lay sister, her habit torn at the shoulder where the weave unravels like the fraying vows under strain. Resolution comes not in exorcism's thunder, but in the bishop's measured intervention, his arrival on the feast of St. Stephen with a retinue of clerks on palfreys, shod at the diocesan farrier, their saddlebags bulging with the ritual's appendices and vials of chrism compounded in the cathedral's mortar of Carrara marble, its pestle veined with quartz from the quarry drifts. The chapter convenes in the refectory, its trestle tables cleared of the Christmas pottage of peas and salted cod from the Lenten stores unbarreled in the salting shed. The air hazy with the thuribal's myrrh gum burned over coals from the sacristy brazier. The bishop, vested in a chasuble of brocaded velvet from the Flemish looms traded at the Bruges fairs, intones the rite of adjuration, his aspergillum of hyssop twigs, dipped in the stoup of blessed salt water drawn from the Elbe's font at the Easter blessing, sprinkled over the afflicted, lined on the rush mats woven from river sedge. Remedies layer the practical with the pious. Bleedings continued in the infirmary, the phlegm sterilized in the boiling copper over the hearth's lug pole, the blood caught in basins of glazed earthenware scoured with river sand to remove the iron tang, and possets of valerian root steeped in the still room's alembic of glass blown in the Nuremberg workshops, its distillate dosed with a horn spoon to calm the humors thought inflamed by demonic bile. By Epiphany, the mania ebbs, the bites receding like the winter thaw that softens the cloister paths, turning the gravel to mud that clings to the wooden clogs sold with leather scraps from the tanner's offcuts. The final surge claims only the youngest novices in the dormitory, where the truckle beds are drawn close under the rule's watch of the mistress of novices. Her lantern of horn and tin casting pools of light on the whitewashed walls, hung with the prior's charts of the lunar phases pricked on sheepskin parchment. Sister Anna, yourself in this immersion, feels the compulsion once during the midnight office, your teeth grazing the sleeve of the sister beside you in the stall, the wool tasting of lanolin from the fulling mill's walk where the habits are milled with wooden stocks, powered by the stream's undershot wheel. restraint comes swift. The cord binding your wrists knotted by the portress with sailor's hitches from her lay days. The night passed in vigil with the psalter recited in whispers toward the temptation. Outcomes weave back into the convent's fabric with the spring's greening. The herb garden revived under the dibber's turn, its beds manured with the ash from the Lenten fasts raked from the hearth grates. The bishop's report, inscribed on vellum rolls sealed with his signet ring of chased gold from the episcopal mint, attributes the mania to ergotism from the rye bread baked in the oven's brick dome, its flour ground from fields tainted by the fungus Claviceps purpurea, its purple sclerosia harvested unwittingly in the autumn sheaves bound with rye straw twisted by hand. The convent adapts, the miller summoned to sift the grist with bolting cloths of horsehair stretched on frames of ash lathe, the tainted loaves fed to the dovecote pigeons whose gizzards grind the kernels harmless, and the diet augmented with spelt from the abbey's demesne, its kernels winnowed in the barn's baskets of willow withes to remove the chaff that harbors the spores. The wounds heal under the salves of comfrey leaf, bruised in the mortar with mutton fat rendered from the kitchen scraps, bandaged with linen boiled in the scullery's copper, and aired on the laundry lines strung with pegs whittled from hazel rods. Resilience gleams in these quiet mens. The chapter's rotation of watchers, their shifts marked on the sand glass, calibrated by the prior's astrolabe of brass from the Antwerp silversmiths, ensuring no sister stands alone in the vigil. The shared possets passed in the recreation hour, the sisters' hands steadying each other's as the tincture drips from the horn spoon, a communion of flesh beyond the Eucharist's wafer stamped with the chalice iron. Personal echoes persist in the Garth's walks. Gertrude, her wrist scarred faintly like a rosary bead, confides in the recreation's murmur of her release from the cell, the door's hasp oiled anew with linseed pressed from the abbey's flax, turning on hinges planed smooth by the joiner's draw-knife. This obscure affliction, a mere entry in the bishop's visitation rolls amid the era's greater schisms and plagues, illuminates the cloister's hidden fractures. How the vow's isolation, compounded by the century's famines and fevers, could summon mania from the mundane rye loaf, a hysteria born of the body's quiet revolt against the soul's unyielding yoke. In our era of screened solitude and viral whispers, where cloisters take digital form and ergot yields to algorithms, one reflects, if a convent's bread could unbind the sisters' peace in 1491, what subtle toxins in our shared routines might yet draw the hidden bite, urging us to mend not just the wound, but the weave that holds us whole. As the evening shadows lengthen across these tales of quiet unraveling, let us pause together in the soft hush that follows, where the rhythms of history settle like dust motes in a sunlit room, undisturbed and serene. We have wandered through Strasbourg's cobblestone streets, where feet once swirled in endless circles under a summer sky heavy with unspoken burdens, each step a fleeting release from the weight of want. We lingered by Lake Victoria's gentle shores, listening to laughter ripple like rain on still water, a village's hidden tensions blooming into shared, breathless joy amid the first breaths of a new nation's dawn. Across Oxfordshire's misty downs, we felt the earth's subtle tremor stir woolen flocks into sudden flight. a reminder that even the humblest creatures carry the world's quiet tremors in their hooves. In Mattoon's lamplit evenings, shadows played tricks on weary porches, weaving illusions from the frayed edges of wartime vigilance, until the night exhaled its phantom and left only the comfort of familiar doors. And in the cloister's stone embrace, where vows bound hearts as surely as woolen habits, a sister's fleeting bite spoke of isolation's tender ache, mended not by force, but by the slow balm of communal prayer. These strange plagues, born of fear's invisible weave, teach us gently that our shared frailties, hunger's whisper, change's murmur, solitude's sigh, can bloom into the unexpected, yet they always fade into resilience's warm fold. They remind us in their passing that we are held by one another, our ordinary lives a tapestry strong enough to weather the oddest storms. So now, as these stories drift away like leaves on a calm stream, breathe deeply, let your eyelids grow heavy, and rest in the knowledge that history's strangest notes resolve always into peace. Sleep well. The night is kind.